Bentornati dalla Adnkronos, io sono Giorgio Rutelli e oggi siamo di nuovo a una conferenza internazionale organizzata dalla Nato Defense College Foundation. Si parla di Indo-Pacifico, di prevenzione e dialogo e in questi discorsi, in queste discussioni ad altissimo livello si tratterà delle partnership tra la Nato e il mondo dell'Indo-Pacifico, ma anche delle minacce che quotidianamente rischiano di far deragliare sia questo dialogo sia la sicurezza della regione. Avremo molti ospiti con noi qui che saranno intervistati in questo spazio, manderemo in diretta la conferenza in maniera integrale e quindi ci sarà la possibilità sia di ascoltare questi discorsi molto importanti, sia di parlare con i protagonisti qui in questo angolo della Adnkronos. Quindi lasciatemi introdurre il nostro primo ospite, Giulia, eccoci, Giulia Terkovic, che sarà chair del primo panel. Il primo panel, diciamo, appunto, riguarda queste partnership fra Indo-Pacifico e mondo NATO, quindi Europa e Stati Uniti, ma in particolare l'Europa ha capito che da qualche anno è necessario fare delle partnership con questa regione anche sul piano della sicurezza, non più sul piano commerciale, non più sul piano solo politico, diplomatico, ma si parla di un rapporto molto più profondo. Ecco, come mai c'è stato questa realizzazione, questo cambio di paradigma per l'Europa?
Grazie mille. Infatti è diventata una necessità domandarsi perché l'Europa deve focalizzarsi su una regione che è lontana da noi, non è nel nostro vicinato immediato e che però risulta sempre più importante. Le ragioni principali sono state due. Come dicevi, una ragione inizialmente economica, dopo il Covid, la realizzazione che ci siamo resi conto di essere troppo dipendenti economicamente da questa regione, per cui una crisi in questa regione, in paesi come Taiwan per esempio, potrebbe avere un impatto economico molto forte anche in Europa, ma è sempre di più poi con la crisi in Ucraina e la collaborazione tra Cina e Russia e quindi la Cina e il supporto che ha dato alla Russia e che sta dando alla Russia in questa guerra, la realizzazione che il focus sulla regione non può essere soltanto economico, ma deve essere anche più strategico e quindi realizzare che ci sono dei partner con cui siamo più legati, con cui condividiamo i valori e questi sono normalmente la Corea del Sud, sono il Giappone, sono l'Australia e anche Taiwan, con cui condividiamo i valori, con cui cerchiamo di collaborare per sostenerci nel mantenere questi valori nelle due regioni. E allo stesso tempo la sfida di rimanere e di cercare di allargare queste partnership a paesi con cui non necessariamente condividiamo tutti quanti i valori, ma con cui comunque è importante relazionarsi in questo nuovo contesto in cui ci troviamo, che è un contesto di competizione tra grandi potenze, sono gli Stati Uniti da una parte e della Cina dall'altro, e in cui noi ci troviamo come Europa e insieme ad altri paesi della regione Indo-Pacifica a cercare di ricavare un nostro spazio, una nostra autonomia. E uno dei discorsi che faremo poi nella conferenza più tardi sarà proprio ripensare queste partnership e dire come possiamo noi paesi secondari, se vogliamo cooperare maggiormente con altri paesi secondari nella regione Indo-Pacifica per sostenerci a vicenda e cercare di ricavare uno spazio di cooperazione che ci dia maggiore indipendenza.
Ecco, siamo tra l'altro a pochi giorni dal summit NATO dell'AIA. L'Indo-Pacifico sarà uno dei temi al centro di questo summit?
Sarà sicuramente al centro di questo summit. I paesi dell'Indo-Pacifico sono stati invitati ancora una volta, nonostante la nuova presidenza Trump, a partecipare al summit. Bisogna ancora vedere in che forma esattamente, ma c'è l'intenzione di continuare questa collaborazione e di ridefinirla, di darle un carattere più pratico anche, collaborazioni per esempio a livello di cooperazione industriale, sulla difesa. Tanto è già stato fatto e tanto ancora può essere fatto perché continui questa cooperazione mantenendo quello che è la priorità dell'amministrazione Trump allo stesso tempo, che ci chiede, che europei e chiede ai nostri partner dell'Indo-Pacifico di prendere maggiore responsabilità nelle nostre regioni, quindi agli europei di concentrarsi sull'Europa e di mantenere una maggiore sicurezza in Europa e di affrontare le sfide che ci sono in Europa e ai partner indo-pacifici di concentrarsi sulla loro regione. Quindi da un lato bisogna soddisfare questa richiesta che arriva dagli Stati Uniti, ma allo stesso tempo realizzare che comunque bisogna mantenere una cooperazione che rinforza entrambe le regioni.
Grazie mille a Giulia Terkovic, grazie. Ecco, è in attesa dell'inizio del primo panel che sarà introdotto da Alessandro Minutorizzo, ambasciatore che è presidente della Nato Defense College Foundation. Adesso tra poco parleremo anche con Walter Di Martino, che è a capo dell'ufficio Northeast Asia della Direzione Generale per gli Affari Globali del Ministero degli Affari Esteri e della Cooperazione Internazionale, e che parlerà tra poco con noi prima di parlare appunto al panel che introdurrà i lavori di questa conferenza, che dura 2 giorni, dura sia oggi che domani mattina. Ci saranno anche esponenti politici italiani, oggi chiuderà i lavori Deborah Bergamini, e la cosa molto interessante è appunto il numero e il livello degli ospiti internazionali che parteciperanno a questo simposio. Ci sono ospiti da tutta la regione, e quindi quando abbiamo la prospettiva di questa regione in un solo posto, nello stesso momento, è un'occasione che difficilmente si vede in Italia, ed è il motivo poi per cui abbiamo scelto di seguire questo ciclo di incontri. Questo ciclo di incontri si svolge alla vigilia appunto del Summit NATO, che sarà il 24 e 25 giugno all'Aia, ed è un Summit NATO ovviamente molto delicato, perché si svolge all'indomani del nuovo conflitto che si è aperto fra Iran e Israele, e quindi in questo scenario si inserisce ovviamente di nuovo la sicurezza medio orientale, e il quadrante, ecco, del Mediterraneo allargato, che coinvolge anche molto direttamente l'Italia, sarà di nuovo al centro dei discorsi del Summit NATO, che ovviamente negli ultimi anni era stato dominato dalle preoccupazioni e dalle tensioni sul fianco orientale a causa della guerra di aggressione russa nei confronti dell'Ucraina, e che quindi invece tornerà ad allargare lo spettro al fianco sud, e come si è sentito prima appunto nell'intervento di Giulia Terkovic, ci sarà moltissimo spazio per l'Indo-Pacifico, perché, e questo va ricordato, e oggi qui ci saranno anche esponenti di primo piano di Taiwan, la tensione intorno a Taiwan resta molto alta, le operazioni della marina cinese creano una grande instabilità nel Mar Cinese meridionale, e la questione taiwanese ovviamente oggi non è trattata con la stessa urgenza come fino a qualche mese fa, a causa ovviamente dell'alimentarsi quotidiano delle tensioni in altri quadranti, ma non è diminuita l'azione della Cina nei confronti dell'isola, che considera una provincia ribelle, e quindi oggi sarà uno dei grandi temi sul tavolo anche questo di Taiwan. Adesso do di nuovo la linea alla diretta. Abbiamo Walter Di Martino? Ok, allora do di nuovo la linea alla diretta, e fra poco ci ritroviamo per un'altra intervista. Grazie. Siamo tornati. Now we're going to switch to English. We have a guest from the second panel of today's conference. We have Joanna Sichiera, who is Assistant Professor of War Studies at the University and Indo-Pacific Security Initiative of the Atlantic Council in Warsaw. Thank you for being with us. So she's going to be part of the second panel, the one that is going to be dedicated to the hybrid dimension. So as we were saying before, the conference today is going to talk about partnership on one side, so the building part of the issue, and then the hybrid threats part of the issue. So the defending ourselves from external threats. So, Professor, you're an expert in terms of lawfare, which is a mix of law and warfare, and it's a concept of using international law in a way that can actually become an hybrid technique. So it is one of the weapons in today's arsenal for a country. So not using bombs, not using cyber attacks, but using the law, international law in particular, to advance one actual military and political agenda. So how is NATO, behaving in this situation while confronted with China and Russia's lawfare?
Thank you for this question, ladies and gentlemen. I am very honored to be here in Rome because legal warfare is not part of NATO, not yet. Our enemies for our civilization, for human rights, everything was for mainly China and Russia. They have mastered lawfare. They know how to manipulate, maneuver international law system, institutions, while we are a bit behind. We don't know how to react. We still don't call or use law as a weapon, not only as a shield to protect, but also how to attack, how to prevent even. So my mission, personal and professional, is to show our NATO partners. I'm also working with NATO Center of Excellence in Vicenza, Italy. We just published 3 volumes about stability policing. And here I am to share the awareness of legal manipulation, how we should back up, how we should understand that our enemies, they are not playing fair. So therefore, we must be prepared for any type of weapons, as you said, international law including. So
can you give us some examples of this action that foreign countries can exercise against liberal democracies?
I think the most disastrous example is what Russia is doing against Ukraine. Not only it violated its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and now at the negotiation table, Russia will push Ukraine to sign an international law treaty to give away some territory. So, ladies and gents, without pushing even more with military weapons, they will use international law, so agreed agreement where Ukraine will give away its own territory. That is very dangerous because that opens Pandora box for other, terrorist organization, other authoritarian regimes to misuse international law to establish very crazy treaties and everything under the law.
And so we have an example of a potential agreement, but at the same time, there are other fronts in which Russia can actually negotiate a precedent, like stopping Ukraine from entering NATO or deciding the way that it's going to handle its military power. Do you see that there is a new front that is not enough patrolled by our countries? And what about China? Is something happening with China as well? And China, we know, is now creating its own network of international organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We know that they are basically creating a parallel system of international organization. So your point is that we are not aware that this is happening, and this is actually creating legal precedent and new threats for our system of values and rules.
Definitely, because China is the only country so far which put lawfare into its official policy. It has been created in 1990s, and now it's official part of People's Republic of China's policy. They misuse international law. Hong Kong was the example that they didn't need to use tanks to change the total system, autonomous Hong Kong into totally submerged to Beijing. So we are going in a very dangerous areas where we only observe what is happening, but we are not preventing that. So realizing the fact that that law is being used by the weapon is first thing, and then we can counter it. But even in NATO, we have some brochures, and we don't have any political talks, I'm afraid, so far. So maybe, I hope, here in Rome, we will start the conversation.
Thank you, Professor. And so I will now go back to the conference that is about to start. Thank you very much.
Coming along, I'm intrigued. There's a big meeting now happening now in October.
Benvenuti a tutti, grazie per essere venuti. For the second time this year, 2025, we are addressing an area of paramount importance for the international community in a future perspective, with many components not always easy to detect. Perhaps this is the reason why we're here. But where there is not yet, I think, a good understanding and knowledge about such a big area, such an important part of the world. We are going to discuss security today in a large context, not about enemies or confrontation, but rather looking at possible forms of cooperation, at cooperative security. And at the same time, we try to examine emerging and mutating challenges, as well as potential opportunities. The two things go together from our end. This event has been approved by the Science for Peace and Security Program, and a title that speaks by itself about our joint approach. Why it is interesting, I think. We see realities changing today at a much faster pace than in the past, and events shaping the environment well before the books describing them. As a matter of fact, at each passage, we wish to make another step to better understanding the issues, looking at them from new, different angles every time. We convene so today in a serious, informed conversation and in a measure of respect, as usual. We are persuaded that dialogue is a decisive factor in preventing crisis and putting together different aspects. This is why the Foundation embraces cooperative security, the third core task of the NATO concept, as may know some of you. It means what? Promoting partnerships based on some common principles with the purpose of projecting stability at 360 degrees. A two-way street with dialogue, practical cooperation, and consultation. In other words, aiming at reinforcing a peaceful and rules-based international order. These things are not distant concepts, but they are realities, especially when blended threats continue to erode the security of many actors in the region. And when these challenges need new forms of cooperation before the existing one in Asia, to my modest opinion. The Indo-Pacific is relevant in so many ways, and development in this vast region, where the majority of the world population is living, can directly affect the Euro-Atlantic area. To our mind, it is clear, should be clear to everybody, I think, that in today's world we are all interconnected, and events taking place in a continent can easily affect other parts of the world. NATO is not here a primary actor, we know that, but in a general way, is the most important existing security provider. It has a 360 degrees security approach, and it counts 40 nations as partners beyond members of the alliance. We acknowledge here the partnership with Australia, Japan, New Zealand, Korea as being relevant, as dialogue and practical cooperation are going to contribute to regional stability in various ways, and more so in the future, we hope. It helps to avoid dangerous escalations, promoting confidence and joint projects. In this respect, the Nato Defense College has a natural role in terms of education and training, and the foundation complements its action in a meaningful, agile action. The promotion of tools of soft security is of primary relevance in a diversified environment like the one we are living in today. Secure trade routes, stable supply chains, resilient infrastructures, freedom of navigation come first in my list, while at the same time resisting to cyber threats, hybrid measures, and other challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an interesting program, I hope, and I thank the moderators and the speakers for having accepted our invitation here in Rome. They come from different angles in terms of knowledge and also of geography. Some of them are also personal friends, and they have the best available expertise on the subject to be discussed. To conclude, special thanks are given to the Science for Peace and Security program in Brussels, to ICE and Ken Kitatani here in the first row, becoming a friend, to Fondazione CSF, Fondazione Compagnia di San Paolo, the Center for Security Studies of Zurich, and the NATO Defense College, our brother. My thanks go as well to our media partners, I saw somebody in the room, and to the staff of the foundation, to the young boys and girls working with us for their enthusiasm and their hard work. And I thank you for the attention. Grazie per l'attenzione. I hope we have an interesting afternoon. Grazie.
President Minutorizzo, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Max Nielsen, the Commandant of the Nato Defense College, and I think it's only befitting that I follow up with the President's opening remarks with a very few words from our side of the town. As was already introduced, the Indo-Pacific is emerging as the epicenter of the 21st century geopolitics. A vast and dynamic region, home of over half the world's population, and a significant share of global economic growth. It is also where shifting power balances, territorial disputes, and strategic competition are intensifying. For NATO, traditionally focused on the Euro-Atlantic area, the question is not whether it has a role in the Indo-Pacific area, it's rather what form that role should take. The Indo-Pacific is marked by several key trends that impact Euro-Atlantic security. First, the rapid military modernization of regional actors, particularly China, has introduced new challenges to stability. Second, vital sea lanes that connect European and North American economies to global markets run through this region, making security there an economic interest for NATO members. And third, our closest partners, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and New Zealand, are increasingly concerned about their security environment and seek deeper cooperation with NATO. At the 2022 and 2023 summits, NATO recognized the developments in the Indo-Pacific have direct consequences for the Euro-Atlantic security, and the alliance engagement in the region must therefore be proactive, carefully calibrated, and rooted in partnership. NATO's engagement in the Indo-Pacific focuses on three core areas, as I said: partnership, resilience, and upholding a rule-based order, as you just heard from the President. NATO's Indo-Pacific partners bring valuable perspectives and capabilities that complement those of the alliance. These nations are not looking for NATO military deployments, but rather strategic dialogue, intelligence sharing, and cooperation on cyber defense, space, and hybrid threats. Establishing structured mechanisms for joint exercises, interoperability, and technology sharing would reinforce deterrence and crisis management capability across both regions. At the Nato Defense College, we have engagement as one of our main tasks, which include course members and visiting fellows from those partner nations, as well as off-site activities like the Conference of Commandants, Kiev Week, Gulf Week, etc. The threats NATO faces in the Euro-Atlantic are increasingly mirrored in the Indo-Pacific. Disinformation campaigns, cyber attacks, and economic coercion are used to weaken democracy and disrupt alliances. NATO can play a critical role in sharing best practices on resilience building, cybersecurity frameworks, and countering hybrid threats. Additionally, cooperation on critical infrastructure such as undersea cables and energy supply chains could enhance collective security, again, across both theaters. NATO is not a Pacific military alliance, but as an alliance of democracies committed to upholding international law, NATO can contribute by supporting freedom of navigation, condemning economic coercion, and reinforcing existing institutions. If instability in the Indo-Pacific threatens NATO's core interests, the alliance should be prepared to offer diplomatic, technological, and, if necessary, logistical support to like-minded partners. In closing, the Indo-Pacific is not NATO's primary theater, but it cannot be ignored. By deepening partnerships, enhancing resilience, and championing a rules-based order, NATO can play a constructive role in regional stability, while safeguarding its own interest. In an era of global competition, security is no longer confined by one geography. NATO's engagement in the Indo-Pacific is not a distraction, it is a strategic necessity. With these words, thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and distinguished guests, it is a true honor to stand before you today at the opening of this vital conference on the Indo-Pacific 2025, Prevention and Dialogue. On behalf of the International Council on Environmental Economics and Development, I extend our deepest gratitude to the Nato Defense College Foundation, to the Nato Defense College, and our co-organizing institutions for bringing us together at such a pivotal moment. The Indo-Pacific today is not only a geopolitical theater, it is a region that encapsulates the full spectrum of challenges and possibilities confronting our interconnected world. From rising sea levels to cyber warfare, from economic coercion to contested maritime corridors, the stakes could not be higher. Yet alongside these challenges lie opportunities for partnerships, innovation, and shared security built on trust, transparency, and inclusive dialogue. ICEAD is proud to co-sponsor this event as part of our ongoing collaboration with the Nato Defense College Foundation. We believe deeply that addressing the 21st century threats requires an integrated approach, one that bridges traditional security with environmental resilience, economic stability, and technological governance. This is especially true in the Indo-Pacific, where overlapping vulnerabilities demand interdisciplinary responses. Let me briefly underscore 3 areas where we see this integration as essential. First, economic insecurity. Environmental insecurity. Climate change is no longer a distant horizon. It is a present disruptor of livelihoods, migration patterns, and regional stability. Rising sea levels, extreme weather, and resource stress are increasingly shaping national security agendas. Prevention in this context means investing not only in defense, but in sustainability, disaster preparedness, and resilient infrastructure. Second, hybrid threats and disinformation. The Indo-Pacific has become a theater of influence operations, cyber incursions, and gray zone tactics. Combating these require more than technological tools. It demands coordinated education, media literacy, and a shared normative framework that protects democratic integrity. And third, inclusive economic development. Inequality, both within and between nations, continues to fuel instability. If we are to build durable peace, we must ensure that the benefits of connectivity, innovation, and growth are shared broadly. Regional partnerships must be structured to include not only major powers, but also small island states, indigenous communities, and emerging economies whose voices are too often sidelined. This conference provides a valuable opportunity to take a step forward, not simply in analysis, but in relationship building. The work of prevention begins here, in dialogue rooted in mutual respect and a shared recognition that no single actor, no single nation can navigate these complexities alone. Let us make the most of these 2 days. Let us bring bold ideas, open hearts, and a willingness to listen across disciplines and borders. The future of the Indo-Pacific, and indeed our common future, depends on it. Thank you for your kind attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it's really a pleasure for me to be here today with you, and thank you very much, very kind. And I want to thank the Nato Defense College Foundation, Ambassador Nato Rizzo, for the kind welcome and hosting us here, and all the partners and organizations who actually are making this event possible at this crucial time. Actually, we're meeting really at a crucial time. Last week, we had a meeting of the Ministers of Defense at NATO headquarters, and some key decisions have been taken moving forward to the NATO summit at the end of the month. And not only we discussed about security, terrorism, and defense for the upcoming years, we of course discussed support for Ukraine, but also for the first time in history, we are moving towards a significant increase of defense spending. 5% of defense spending for GDP for our allied countries, a significant increase to the current 2%. 3.5%, as you know, would be for core defense spending, 1.5% for collateral defense spending. This is historic. This actually our Secretary General mentioned it last week, and it is truly historic. This will ensure that the alliance will be able to keep the capacity to deter and defend our territory and keep our 1 billion citizens free. Of course, this conference today tackles many of these points, and that's why it's so important. We will have a panel addressing, of course, the partnership with Indo-Pacific, which is essential. As you know, last year at the NATO summit, we had key discussion with the Indo-Pacific partners, Japan, Australia, Korea, and New Zealand, and we decided 4 key flagship initiatives, which actually allow to ensure that we'll be able to be faster in our upgrade in our defense capabilities. You know, we have a flagship initiative on cyber, which will ensure that we have better capacity to tackle cyber attacks, which, as you know, are attacking our citizens on a daily basis, hospital, banks, citizens like us, with the objective of stealing data, stealing intellectual property. This is something we need to ensure that we are better able to deter to. Also, we have a cooperation very important with Indo-Pacific partners, which deals with the disruptive technologies. This partnership with the IP4 is essential because these countries have the capacity to ensure that we remain at the top edge of technology, able to deter any attack. And of course, support for Ukraine. This is where the IP4 has been essential for NATO in the partnership. And also an area which is very important for our democracies, which is the hybrid threats, specifically information threats. Because democracies, as you know, we are open, but also we can be attacked. We can be weak if we are not able to build resilience among society through better understanding and knowledge. And actually, this is why events like this are important for us as an expert, but also for the citizens. And I want to salute all the people who may watch this event online, thanks to the partnership with the Adnkronos, because only by enhancing the resilience and understanding of what we do as an alliance, of why we need defense, why we need to invest in security today, we can build a more secure and a safer space for us all. In fact, you know, today, we have to confront this. We are spending more on defense. We said 5%. But, you know, many citizens in our countries and our cities, they may wonder, why do we need to spend so much money in security and defense? Can't we spend those money in the Green Deal or spend this money in employment or welfare? This is important. This event is essential because what we speak today and what you do in our community will ensure that citizens understand that security is not an option. Investing in security and defense is not an option. In a world like ours today, where we have autocracies taking the fore, in a world where we have international law, which unfortunately is not as strong as it used to be until a few years ago, in a world where multilateralism is not as strong as it used to be, is on the back step now, we have to invest in security and defense if we want to be able to deter attacks across all domains, and we discussed this in the next couple of days, and ensure that our principles are respected according to what we think is important as democracies. So I think that's why a very important point, I think, and I want really to stress this, and I really thank the Defense College Foundation and Defense College, because in our democracies, communicating and explaining why we do what we do as a defense alliance is essential for the resilience of our democracies. And especially as attacks become more pervasive in our society, especially the hybrid attack, information attacks, cyber attack, we have to be able to defend the alliance and citizens across domains. So I really welcome you all to be here on behalf of NATO headquarters, and I really look forward to the conversation over the next couple of days. Thank you very much.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julia Terkovic. I'm the Deputy Director of the Center for Security, Diplomacy and Strategy. We are based in Brussels, and I have today the great pleasure of moderating the first panel of this conference. And you might have heard in the great introductory remarks the reason why we need to focus on the Indo-Pacific. And indeed, in the past years in Europe, discussions about why should we care about the Indo-Pacific, really emerge in Europe. And you heard the different reasons why we need to care about the Indo-Pacific, right? We need to care mainly for different types of security reasons. Can be economic security, we heard environmental security, can be more traditional security, less traditional security, cyber, and so on. And I think we are now at the stage where we all agreed that the Indo-Pacific region is important, that it's important to invest in the partnership with our partners in the region. Now, it's time also to discuss how to continue this partnership, how to engage with this region. And the reason for this first panel is indeed to discuss these different elements. So how can we engage with the different partners? The more traditional one, the like-minded one, so how can we continue this cooperation, but also how can we engage even further with other partners in the region, and how can we also engage with those that are maybe less like-minded in order to really fully engage with this region and really move from the why question to the actual how question. So I have the great honor today to discuss all these very easy questions with a great panel. So let me briefly introduce them before we move to the session. I will start with Walter Di Martino, head of the Northeastern Asian Office, Director General of Global Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. He's based here in Rome. We also have Kosh Hara, President of the Free and Open Indo-Pacific Forum Institute for Tech Diplomacy at the Atlantic Council from DC. We also have Christina Lin, Senior Non-Resident Associate Fellow at Nato Defense College, Rome. And then Amaya Sanchez, non-resident senior fellow Asia program at the Institute Montaigne. So we will start really with a very brief introduction from the panelists, and then we will move to a more Q&A session. And I really hope you will engage with the panelists, you will engage with questions, because the idea is really to together try to brainstorm on how to move this forward. Walter, we'll start with you, and it would be great if you can frame a bit the discussion around partnership with the Indo-Pacific, as I was saying, with the like-minded, the less like-minded, and if you can provide us with different views on how we can engage further with the region.
Thank you, Julia. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me start by expressing my gratitude to Nato Foundation and Nato Defense College for inviting me to such a prestigious conference. And I really look forward to comparing notes and sharing my reflection with you on the how, exactly, the how, the question that Julia just put forward, how to enhance the cooperative security in this crucial region for the world stability and security, the Indo-Pacific. So my reflection today will be mainly focused on models, on how to seize opportunities and overcome the hurdles that are emerging in that region. In a way, I feel compelled to put up front my professional perspective. As Julia recalled, I'm the head of the Northeast Asia unit at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Global Affairs Directorate General. But I will also dwell on the reminiscence of my work in AVER, since I was the head of the political office at the NATO, the Italian permanent representation to NATO. So starting with that, I just wanted to frame a bit the very center of my intervention, which is how to solve the dilemma on which kind of model should we better use in order to frame the partnerships in the Indo-Pacific. And just a few methodological words. I will, if you consent, I will call positive partnerships those that are built around the idea that we can generate an added value for the membership independently from any specific external factor. And conversely, I will call negative partnerships those who are built as an opposition to a specific external factor, thus considering this one as the quintessential cohesive force for the partnership. We have then a dilemma. So the enhancement of security, of cooperative security in the Pacific should derive from a positive model of the kind I just recalled, or from a negative one. And which one is proving at this time to be more functional to the advancement of our interest and the interest of the members of the partnerships. And finally, I will share with you a reflection on how to promote a culture of partnership that can move past this aforementioned polarization and in a way serve the ultimate goal of ensuring that the security of the area will be duly reflected also in the security of the Euro-Atlantic sphere. If we have a look at the environment in which we move in the Indo-Pacific, it is clear that it's neither the size nor the complexity of the region itself that nurtures this dilemma. To the contrary, we have an absence of shared security vision and a robust multilateral security architecture. So starting from that, we need to recognize that the Indo-Pacific regions at this time operate a patchwork of bilateral alliances, ad hoc coalitions, and regional groupings. They often overlap. Unfortunately, they are rarely coherent. And in such an environment, the risk of fragmentation is much higher, and the risk for miscalculation is even higher. Just a look at the negative partnership, the one that I was mentioning before. I think this is the simplest and, in a way, the most immediate to grasp. It can be framed in so many ways as a kind of tool for a containment policy, or a kind of solidarity bound against a common peril. It is fundamentally a reactive connection that stems from the identification of out-of-control factor that can impact the status quo and change it in an undesired way. This is very clear if we take a specific example for the Taiwan Strait. We often recall the need to maintain, preserve the status quo there. It is a case in point. It is a point of reference, though we have to admit that it's not always so straightforward to identify the political essence of this concept, status quo. If we continue to analyze this negative partnership model, we need to recognize also the fact that it's built around the idea that there is a non-desirability of any other possible models. So we need to preserve the staticity of the situation as it is. And this helps in not generating any kind of competition within the members of the becoming partnership. But we cannot forget the disadvantages of the model, especially one. It really depends, its activation and its capacity to stand the test of time depends on the effective translation of the risk against which the partners federate. And if this risk remains idle for too long, there will be a natural reassessment by each and every member of the partnership about the decision on how to spend best the resources that they have. Just a quick look to the positive one, and then I will end with my theoretical part. I really thank you for bearing with me on this. Well, even the positive partnership, in spite of the reassuring name, is not built around a simple positive concept. It's, on the contrary, it is built around the undesirability of the status quo. So the partners federate because they want to make an advancement and to overcome the limits that are imposed, that are already there, and they have been imposed by an external factor. So what is necessary in order to take forward this kind of positive partnership is to have a vision that aims at unleashing the existing powers in our society. A positive model looks at the potential. A positive model is not driven by fear. It's not definitely a coalition of the willing. It's something more. It's a project on which its members embark to move past their individual positioning on the global scene. But it's not a risk-free road. And here comes my personal reflection. It's the cohesion within any positive partnership that is at risk because it's a function of the fact that its members can really impact on the capacity of the group as such to move forward. And now I will take my last sentence before the intervention ends, just to have a look at the effective of these models. So if we have a look at what has been promoted so far, let's take the Chinese way as first. The Chinese model has been fundamentally focused on the positive model, promising, but definitely not delivering. And that is a fact because it's opened a way for reframing also our capacity to interact with those partners or not partners that are in a way called in the sinosphere promoted by the Chinese model. To the contrary, I have to say the Western model has been so far mainly negative because it has been around the idea that we need to defend against a certain peril. Is this sufficient? Probably not. And I will really run quickly to my conclusion to say that what is really missing in our side is the capacity to add the positive side to the model we've been promoting so far. We have a very successful example that was just recalled. So we can refer to what has been launched in NATO, the flagship project with the IP4. This shows that there is a capacity, if there is a possibility to include a positive development with a measurable target in order to promote a new vision of security partnership in the Indo-Pacific. What is lacking still is the capacity to have this model as an inclusive one. So the capacity to talk to those who are outside the current bound, the current partnership. And in order to do that, perhaps we need to return to what Ambassador Minutorizzo just mentioned at the very beginning, which is the dialogue. Just a final word on that, just to say how important it is for Italy as a founding member of NATO and as part of G7 and in general as an actor on the global scene. Dialogue remains the key in order to advance our capacity to interact with that part of the world, which is unfortunately called with an unfortunate expression, which is Global South. It is our capacity to open the dialogue with that part that will also reinforce, or to the contrary, will fragilize our partnership with the countries in the Indo-Pacific in order to unleash the potential that those countries have and our capacity to enhance the cooperative security over there. We need to remind that we need to talk perhaps a bit far broader than the simple region we are looking at right now. Not against anyone, but for the benefit of everyone. Thank you.
Walter, thanks a lot. Very interesting point, and I think I suppose we'll go back to some of the points you raised in the Q&A, but it's really a good response, right? The idea of a positive partnerships that build on something and to move on, I think it's very interesting, and as you rightly said, this is maybe easier with partners that are more like-minded, and you mentioned the IP4, for example, for NATO, but it's also important to then engage with others. And on this, we'll move to the next panelist as well. Kosh, would be great if you can also develop a bit more and tell us more about other partners that are getting closer and closer to Europe in the last years, and in particular India, which is becoming one of the key partners for Europe.
Yes, first of all, good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks to Lorenzo and others for extraordinary coordination and making me come here, so that's all good. I'll share 3 observations, building something on my colleague saying here. You know, how does NATO partner with Indo-Pacific? The biggest hurdle is the understanding and acceptance of the idea of collective security. It is well-intentioned and well-entrenched in Europe. It is almost a knee-jerk allergic reaction when you talk in the Indo-Pacific region. So you have to sort of overcome that particular issue. And in that end, the 3 things I'm going to talk about is what people say, what are the pronouncements of people, politicians largely, and what exactly is going on, I mean, in the more practicing side of things. So of course, most things in Indo-Pacific, especially Quad, the sort of Indo-Pacific Quad, it is defined more by what it is not. If you ever dare to say Quad, you know, maybe a security, loose security coalition, no, dare not. We're about humanitarian, we do sort of anti-maritime exercises, we go out and help on when there's a typhoon. So, but if you look at it, you are seeing a lot more trilateral coordination and with collective coordination, whether it be US, Japan, South Korea, US, Japan, Philippines, US, Japan, Philippines, and Australia. And if you saw under President Biden's tenure, there was a lot of defense compacts either renewed, strengthened, or entered into unilaterally in Indo-Pacific area, everything from South Korea down Papua New Guinea down to Australia and New Zealand. So that also raises a fascinating question that, and then you see the Malabar exercises, so I'm not going to give you the Indian perspective. You have an Indian gentleman who's going to talk after that. They'll provide the Indian perspective. So a lot more is going on in the coordinating side even to some degree interoperability side, but dare not call it collective security because we are allergic to collective security within the region a little bit. Now then you have America, which never misses an opportunity to tell Europeans, you cannot count on me to take your back on security assistance. You got to do collective. 5% is a fantastic. Nobody would have thought about it just last year. Now you're talking 5%. But at the same time, America is in Indo-Pacific is just a unilateral security assistance. There's none idea. It's just on one end we say we cannot cover the load of Europe, but on other end, Indo-Pacific, we're going to back you up from Japan, from South Korea to Philippines. So there's sort of oddity and asymmetry to that concept as well. All that means today that it is literally the most commonsensical, the most obvious, and the most sort of good thing to happen is a collective security in the Indo-Pacific. It makes America's burden less. It makes collective resiliency 10 times stronger if we have it as opposed to unilateral defense assurances from America. So that's where we are headed, and we're kind of evolving that way while, as Shakespeare and Julius Caesar, they're protesting too hard, but we're sort of inching that way with our protestations. Now, when you go down that road, one of the important thing that comes up, which is another odd issue of strategic autonomy. So I would not join collective security because it somehow dampens my strategic autonomy. My Indian colleagues can talk about it. This is the first thing that an Indian would say, that I know, or even to ASEAN to some degree. Now, if you look at the facts, alliances actually strengthen your strategic autonomy, does not degrade it. And I don't have to tell this crowd how every NATO member's strategic autonomy is strengthened by being part of NATO member. And it is China that degrades India's or limits India's strategic autonomy, not the Quad or the United States. It is Russia that does it to China. And same thing for Europe. When Macron, everybody talks about strategic autonomy. The limitation to European strategic autonomy is not America, but China and Russia. So we have to sort of come up to and look at it, strategic autonomy, also, what people say to where we are at in discussing on it. Now, the third aspect on this, and you can talk about, certainly from American side, our closest ally, whether it be Israel, whether it be Japan, whether it be UK, you can see a strategic autonomy of Israel is substantially higher for American alliance than it would be without it. So I think the notion of strategic autonomy also be varied to look at it. So collective security, strategic autonomy, and then we come down to really, in this area, we focused a lot on Pacific Island. We really need to focus a lot more on India. So it's fascinating that, Indian Ocean rather. So we got all these folks here talking about how NATO needs to look at Indo-Pacific. I was just in Marseille, last 2 days, and the Indian foreign minister was there as well, Jaishankar. And he made a fascinating point. He said, India is a Mediterranean country. India has 480,000 people in the Mediterranean, has $80 billion trade, has a port in Mediterranean, is building an airport in Mediterranean. So you see the connection and certainly a need for this collective part. And then those of us, and especially in America, those who say that it's an Indo-Pacific and Atlantic theater, obviously are doing something else when North Koreans are fighting in Ukraine, or the only reason that Russia can sustain the war is because of Chinese backing. So there's a lot of connectivity, to which, in the end, where do we go with it? The notion of collective security, at least by those of us who have the NATO experience, need to be made much more forcefully and much more clearly in the Indo-Pacific. The benefits of collective security really needs to be discussed much more openly than sort of, in a surreptitious manners and other different way. And we need to achieve it. Now, I don't think that's achieved by expanding NATO to the Indo-Pacific. Probably will end up into an Indo-Pacific Treaty Organization, an IPTO of sorts, which may very well learn and partner from the NATO experience. But the notion of having NATO expanding, it fulfills every conspiracy theorist in ASEAN and India that, oh my, look, NATO is coming all the way to the Indo-Pacific. And so it feeds into this whole sort of shebang. But that doesn't preclude from working strongly with the 4 countries that I mentioned. I think it's fantastic. NATO certainly look at it. And the last point is Here we're largely talking NATO in military and air force. Indo-Pacific is largely a naval domain. So we've got a different set of issues that come with that. It would be useful to talk more. My time's up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And here again, I'm sure there are a few points that will come back during the Q&A, including collective security in the Indo-Pacific. And you had some arguing that actually there should be an Indo-Pacific NATO at a certain point. But of course, there are a lot of questions about that, about the type of partnership, the differences between the countries there. But I'm sure we can go back to that during the Q&A. We now move to Christina, and you will tell us a bit more about another partner, which is Taiwan, that is also gaining more and more attention in Europe as a whole, as an important partner, definitely in terms of economic cooperation, but also more and more on other domains as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Ambassador Motorizzo and NTC Foundation for inviting me to the conference. It's really an honor to be here. I've been asked to speak on NATO's evolving approach towards the Indo-Pacific and of course, Taiwan. So my remarks will be divided into three parts. I will first provide a brief synopsis of NATO's engagement in the region and how China and Taiwan have increasingly gained prominence in NATO's regional strategy. I will then set the background context of why Taiwan is important for regional security and how can existing partnerships be developed to cooperate with Taiwan, and conclude with limitations of these cooperation scenarios and potential role for NATO's involvement. So NATO's engagement in the Indo-Pacific region are based on two main interests: shared values and transnational threats. Outreach began in the 1990s and early 2000s, and formal partnership agreement with all four partners were signed in early 2010. NATO has also held military staff talks with China in 2010, which continues today. And actually, back in March, they had their 8th iteration of NATO-China military staff talk in Beijing. In 2016, NATO engaged the Indo-Pacific partners as a group of 4 in the IP4 format with focus on North Korea. In the wake of 9/11, NATO began out-of-area operation in Afghanistan with the support from IP4. So NATO's regional engagement precedes awareness of security challenges from China. Cooperative security areas have included counterterrorism, anti-piracy, maritime security, cyber defense. The first time NATO mentioned China was in 2019, and in 2022, NATO's strategic doctrine mentioned how developments in the Indo-Pacific can affect Euro-Atlantic security. And that same year, IP4 heads of state, which is unprecedented, attended NATO summit for the first time, followed by subsequent attendance in 2023 and 2024, including the 2024 NATO Defense Ministerial. What brought this about was mainly increasing China-Russia alignment on Iran, Ukraine, and other issues, and the sudden prominence of Taiwan's semiconductor sector during the COVID pandemic. So against this backdrop, I want to focus on Taiwan as a potential NATO technology partner in the Indo-Pacific and why it is important for regional security. Well, there are three main reasons why Taiwan is important. First of all, it's part of the first island chain and it's important for Japan's sea lines of communication. It is a chip manufacturing powerhouse, and it is also a thriving democracy with shared values. And this is very important with NATO as a value-based alliance, but it gets very little mention about Taiwan. On the first point of its geostrategic significance, the first island chain extending from Japan to Indonesia is important to the US as a line of defense and strategic barrier for deterring China's military activities. But of course, China views this as an encirclement strategy by the US and its allies. For Japan, Taiwan is in the middle of the Taiwan Strait and the Luzon Strait between Taiwan and Philippines. So these are two important sea lines of communication for Japan. Japan imports 97% of its energy and 80% of its container cargo travels through the Taiwan Strait. The Chinese are also cognizant of this vulnerability, and in a 2013 military publication, they mentioned how if Taiwan is reunified with China, Japan's maritime lines of communication would fall within ranges of China's fighters and bombers. So Taiwan security is very important for Japan's security. On the second point of semiconductor manufacturing prowess, Taiwan has near monopolistic control of 92% of global advanced advanced chip supply that powers fighter jets, AI, smartphones, and is the backbone of the digital economy. So as NATO is increasingly focused on science and technology cooperation with like-minded states in the Indo-Pacific, which is the third point of Taiwan's importance as a like-minded, thriving democracy, this could provide opportunity for Taiwan to play a greater role in cooperative security. And there have been several proposals of NATO Plus, Quad Plus, and AUKUS Pillar 2 frameworks. On NATO Plus, last month, the US Congress proposed to incorporate Taiwan as a NATO Plus member. NATO Plus members include the IP4 and Israel, and this would provide access to intelligence sharing and streamline arms sale. Another proposal is the Quad Plus with the US, India, Japan, Australia cooperating with Taiwan, as well as as Taiwan's access to AUKUS Pillar 2. AUKUS is the Australian, UK, and US security partnership. And the Pillar 2 is focused on defense technology sharing. So the Taiwanese are actually very interested in AUKUS Pillar 2. But of course, with these proposals, there are limits on these cooperation scenarios. India is a wild card in the Quad Plus, as mentioned earlier, or an Asian NATO proposed by Japan's Prime Minister, given India's tradition as a non-aligned movement member. And India prefers a posture to balance China, not be anti-China. And in fact, China criticized US Indo-Pacific strategy as a 5-4-3-2 framework of the 5 I's, the Quad, the AUKUS, and a series of bilateral treaties to contain China. So it's very creative framing. As a recent US Institute of Peace report on NATO and IP4 argued, the IP4 won a cooperation scenario characterized by NATO with the Indo-Pacific and not necessarily in the Indo-Pacific. The partners don't expect NATO to be a direct actor in the Indo-Pacific, but expect the alliance to coordinate with them on issues of mutual concern. Which brings me to the final part of NATO's cooperative security role in the Indo-Pacific with Taiwan. One proposal is for Taiwan to become an enhanced opportunities partner, EOP, with NATO's Science and Technology Organization, the STO. Japan and South Korea are already EOP members and with STO, and Singapore actually has been involved in STO events in the strategic and planning level, despite not being a NATO Asian partner. So Taiwan could potentially engage in a similar exchange as an EOP partner in STO, especially to build resilience in the semiconductor supply chain. Well, my time is pretty much up, so I'll stop here and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Christina, and very good points about the technology, which is indeed one of the areas where we can move forward with the cooperation with several countries in the region, not only the most like-minded one, but maybe others as well. Let's move now to Amaya. We'll try to also provide a slightly different perspective and also build beyond the element of more traditional security that we have been discussing so far, but also providing a broader overview on how we can move forward with this cooperation.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, the Nato Defense College Foundation, for having me. It's a pleasure to be back. I wanted to sort of give a bird's eye view, if you will. So my task today was, that's better. My task today was to give a sort of pathways to conflict prevention in the Indo-Pacific. So I thought if we want to talk about conflict prevention, we should highlight sources of conflict. Then I realized that's pretty much what everyone is going to be talking about. So I'll just give 2 points and a sort of underlying framework of how I see the region. My first point is that there is clearly a trust deficit between the global and regional powers in the region, but also among regional actors. And this is really important. We're not just thinking, US, China, but also obviously India, China, China, Japan, China, South Korea, Australia, China, you name it. I think that's really a crucial point against, as Cor was mentioning, the absence of any kind of regional collective security arrangement. In fact, the word alliance in itself, I think, is highly problematic in an Asian context. My second point has to do with the fact of how the region, the approach within the region, but also from external actors, including the US, has gone from let's say, going from a more of a dialogue perspective in engagement, thinking of, for example, Obama's pivot to Asia, then shifting to Trump 1.0, Biden deterrence, and I think we're pretty much approaching a sort of preemption approach, which is pretty scary, especially if there were to be accidental escalations because of particular regional crisis. So that's sort of the overarching perspective. The hotspots remain pretty much the same in the region. I did want to highlight the India-China border and currently the India-Pakistan-China triangle. I think that's something we should definitely keep in mind, plus the China-Russia alliance because of its relevance just generally. Now, it's easy to pinpoint the tensions and sources. I'm going to try and at least give 3 ideas on potential sources of conflict prevention. In my view, the way I see the US and China, they're both in a way trying to establish the rules of the game in the Indo-Pacific and how we should manage competition there. So we should at least attempt to have some rules in place related to issues of nuclear deterrence, for sure. But not only, China should be part of any future treaty on arms race limitations, for example. And I'm not sure the current existing agencies or institutions are actually valid. I'm not sure the ASEAN Regional Forum is valid, or even the EAS and ADMM plus. So we could perhaps think of out-of-the-box arrangements, 1.5, 2.0 track dialogues on the side of the Shangri-La dialogue, for example. That's one idea. But security, as you're pointing out, Julia, indeed is not just about hard security, traditional security, but also about soft security. There should be, sorry, I forgot to mention also, some kind of an agreement on how to approach military application of artificial intelligence. That's also a key point, and I know we'll discuss a lot of this when we come to hybrid and other kind of technologies embedded in defense, but also soft security. I think we often tend to undermine this, but I see it as an entry point, and not just an entry point, it's an incredibly important risk and priority for a lot of the countries in the region. Let's think of the littoral, especially island nation states in the region that are dealing with climate change issues, that are dealing with disasters, both man-made and also humanitarian issues, for example. I was thinking of health, livelihoods, even financial stability. So a lot of these can be taken into account, and I think that's also a leeway that we could use, not just hard security. We tend to overestimate that too. My second point has to do with the actual regional middle powers in the region. They have a lot of joint interests. They could establish a lot of means and forms of, one, crisis simulations, but also confidence-building measures. In fact, this is already happening, as was mentioned already. There's all kinds of partnerships taking place, be they trilateral, or nowadays it's very much in fashion to talk about multilaterals. I'll mention this later again. But I see, for example, the maritime domain as a domain that, well, it's very vast. We can think of maritime security. We can also think of maritime safety. So it's not just about maritime intelligence sharing and anti-submarine warfare, for example, but it's also about other aspects that are vital for a lot of countries in the region. And I'm thinking of, for example, illegal unreported and unregulated fishing. I'm thinking of piracy, protection of exclusive economic zones, but also, and this is an area I would really like to perhaps dwell into later from others too, gray zone tactics. There's a lot of action, so to speak, taking place in the dual use of, for example, ships that are allegedly commercial, but the fact that they also have a military component, ports, even undersea. So that's also an aspect that's extremely worrying for a lot of the countries in the region, especially those that find themselves having to hedge, right? Either towards the US or China. So I think that there's a lot that can be done there. And I wanted to give the example of the Information Fusion Center in the Indian Ocean region, which is actually led by the Indian Navy. I think this could be replicated. It's actually, they focus on information sharing, exchange, They also have a number of agreements with liaison partners. And a number of liaison partners are not just in the region, it's also the UK and the US that are part of this. They also have regional offices in Singapore, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands. And this kind of arrangement, they work too with the Indian Ocean Commission. And I would like to point here too that there's so much focus on the East and Southeast China Seas, but Chinese sort of influence is clearly gearing now towards the Southwest and Northwest Indian Ocean. So there should be a lot more focus on the Indian Ocean at the moment. I agree with what Cor said, absolutely. And because my time is almost up, just to say that these minilaterals that are happening on both ends of the spectrum. They're happening on the like-minded, trusted partners, but they're also happening on the illiberal, non-trusted, you name it. So the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for example, has a number of military exercises going on. So does Iran, together with Russia, together with China. There's all kinds of combinations. And I don't necessarily see this, I mean, this obviously points to fragmentation, but not necessarily instability, in that I think we have to embrace the current reality, as was mentioned, and multilateralism is in decay. And I do think that if we manage to this sort of interest-based approach and just take it in a more pragmatic fashion, that could be very helpful in general. I'll stop here because my time's up too.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. So we only have 20 minutes left for this panel. So I first would like to see if there are questions from the audience, with the idea of collecting a few questions so we can continue the debate. If not, or while you think about your question, I see there is one. Okay. So we have questions. So maybe let's open it up to the audience. Would be great if you could introduce yourself and also tell us if you have a question that is specific for one of the panelists. So we have one here and then another one in the back. I'll try to collect maximum 3, okay?
Thank you very much. I can shout.
Maybe this one.
No, okay. Dr. Joanna Shakira, War Studies, University of Poland and Atlantic Council, Washington. I have a question for you, madam. You mentioned China and you suggested that we should include them in any legal arrangement. I got some nervous tick when I heard that. Thank you. Yes, so China and legal arrangements, they are already breaching every possible legal arrangement. So do you think it's wise to keep them in a loop, or because they do what they are doing in Indo-Pac and Africa, South America, Oceania, is it better to have them closer and, I don't know, watch them, or rather intentionally not to invite them to show where we stand with our democratic values, protection of human rights and human dignity? Thank you.
Thank you. And I think there was one on the back there.
Yeah. Does it work? No.
Yeah, while we wait for the mic, in the meantime, I can also ask one question. There is also another one there on the back. Okay. Would be also great if in the next round you would also maybe reflect a little bit more on the upcoming NATO summit. Of course, we have a new administration in the United States. So also if you have a few points of reflection on how this can actually impact the partnership with the Indo-Pacific countries, that would be also great. Let's see if we have sorted out the mic issue. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm Eduardo Barca from Sapienza School of Advanced Studies. I'm a bachelor student. And I would like to ask, since it was cited weapon control, arms control in the Indo-Pacific, are there any specific programs considering the presence of at least 4 nuclear-armed countries into the Indo-Pacific? If there are some specific programs for weapon of mass destruction regulation and international partnerships to nuclear control and also nuclear cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Buonasera, good afternoon. This is Gonzalo Ceballos from the Spanish Atlantic Association. The question is relating to the areas of Indo-Pacific developments in space. Could you deliver what is a race for space in the Indo-Pacific? I understand the Indo-Pacific countries are the ones that are challenging Occidental domain of a space.
Good. Thank you very much. I think we'll stop here for the first round. So maybe we can follow or go into reverse order, Amaya, as the first question was specifically addressed to you. Maybe you would like to start, and then we'll see if others also wants to jump in.
Yeah, my answer to you, Joanna, is I specifically said non-formal, informal. So, of course, there are, just UNCLOS in itself, right? They're breaching it consistently, and so many others, but so is Russia, and so many, and I could see, the US doing this very soon as well. So, I don't think we should go the traditional way. That's what I was trying to say. I think we need to think out of the box, and they have done what they have to do in so many ways formally, but I think we need to go the minilateral way and the more informal way, and that's why I said the 1.5 track, 2.0, something that's different to what we're used to. And now we see, there was this, for example, I'm thinking on artificial intelligence, there was this huge summit happening, you will all remember, co-organized between the Indians and the French in Paris, and it's happening again next year in India. So I think there's setups that can be arranged whereby I do think we have to engage the Chinese. It's a must. And if not, they would have the perfect excuse, especially, from a European perspective, even more right now, if you ask me, because with the Euro-Atlantic rift, I think we have to sort of be very pragmatic at this point in time.
Would you like to go back also to the arms control question, maybe?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on arms control or nuclear deterrence. But I do know that China has, as far as I know, signed to the NPT and the CBTPT, both. I don't know specifically there's regional arrangements on that, but again, it need not be an official treaty or an official engagement because, again, as I said, I think we have enough of that, and we don't need more of. I think it needs to be something more informal, and the way things are going, it's, in my view, the way forward.
Good, thank you. Christina, would you like to go next?
I don't have any comments in terms of
just your mic.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
In terms of the IP4 cooperation in space, I don't have, I'm not familiar with that, but I do know that Japan is very proactive in space cooperation. Taiwan is not a player in space, so that's all I know about the IP4 space cooperation. I don't know if the other panelists will have visibility on this.
So on the China issue, you absolutely have to talk to China. I think the notion of putting them away and not talking them, that makes no sense. We used to talk to the Soviet Union, height of Cold War, we need to talk to China. You have to bring China to a negotiating table. But how do you negotiate with China is what is bureaucrats or those in government need to earn their money on. You normally negotiate and expect countries to follow up. You should negotiate with China expecting that it will not, it'll break it, for all the reasons that you mentioned. But that doesn't mean you don't, and particularly on the nuclear side of stuff. We cannot be in the nuclear race without having some sort of a control and agreement. So that's absolutely true. But I think collective security, I think it'd be helpful in this context because it's a very NATO-centric view of Indo-Pacific. How can I take what I've got and take it over there? The reason I mentioned different Indo-Pacific because in Indo-Pacific there are different security issues than just hard ones. So you already have a substantial amount of coordination and discussion on economic security. Japan took the lead. We even talked that we'll have a G7 will even set up a fund which will help countries detach and deter economic coercion. You can see a lot of similarity. That is much more digestible. Illegal fishing, distant water fleet. China's distant water fleet on illegal fishing is pretty much 90% of all global distant water fleet, which is fishing in the high water seas. And most of them are a combination of literally a naval militia on oceans. So I think agreeing on that and how to work on this system, you'll find a lot more. So all those people who are so hesitant on collective security will be jumping in, and they do all of this stuff all the time. So I think so you talk in those frame, and that is how the Indo-Pacific collective security will come, not just looking purely on kinetic. That's why it cannot be a NATO extension, gotta be ground up. And nobody would have expected today, if I had this discussion yesterday, last year, that from 2% will end up in 5% in 1 year. So this notion of hard give and frog, the strategic autonomy or not, the enemy has a vote. This is what we always said. So if you see the recent India-Pakistan issue, and if you're going to look at and see the increased collaboration between China and Pakistan, India can decide they want to be a strategic autonomous country at some point. Either it calls it or not, it'll be much strongly allied with us and other European countries. So world changes rapidly, and all these sort of sacred cows of no collective security, no strategic autonomy, that's all nonsense. You have to look at hard stuff on the ground. And I think in hard stuff on the ground, there's a lot of stuff going on in Indo-Pacific, that sort of evolution towards different iterations of collective security.
Thank you.
I think I will just add a few words, and I was reflecting on the possibility to answer the 3 questions with a single word, valid for all of them. And I think this word is multilateralism. Basically, we all have the tools in order to include, for instance, China in the dialogue, perhaps informally when it is necessary, as Amaya said, but also formally, because otherwise we will have the space for China itself and for others to present that vector, which is multilateral forces, as an inefficient one, which is not the case, actually. It's something that can be improved, and with our participation, with our engagement, then it can definitely improve and reach the goals we want. This is true also for weapons control in a way, because the instruments are already there. If we forget about the validity of those instruments, then we will be forced to create something new, something that probably will be insufficient to cover the equity of all the partners in the region, all the prospective partners. So again, let's make a better use of what we have already at the moment, which is the multilateral institutions around. And finally, space. Definitely, I do not see that as a field for competition. It's something where progress can be made through a positive competition. So, since we have already, also in this case, multilateral institution that can frame and regulate the partnership, let's make use of them.
Just sorry, one thing on space. The Artemis program that India just joined. So I think in space world India is really the leading critical partner for a collective space stuff. And the joining of Artemis, I can go more in detail when you talk about it.
Oh, can I just say something about excluding China in dialogue? I think it's important to always have dialogue. Even Pentagon has hotline. You don't want hotlines between different militaries, even if they're an enemy or a peer competitor. And Taiwan, the KMT, they want to reestablish dialogue with China, because you can't really exclude the second largest economy in the world and a large regional player and a permanent member of the UN Security Council in any regional security. So I think dialogue is important.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for this. It seems to me in this discussion, and if you have additional questions, just wave and I'll give you the floor. It seems to me that we discuss the need to have some sort of multi-level engagement, if you want. We discussed that there are some partners that we really trust, with whom we can really build further on the technology element, for example, going forward more in terms of collective defense and so on. And there are partners or other actors in the region with whom we see the need to engage, but at the same time, we see the big challenges for doing that. And we should also remember the element of time. There are times for different things. Maybe sometimes it's not time to engage in dialogue or push for certain types of dialogue because simply your counterpart is not ready. There are times where you need to further invest on the partners that are maybe closer to you. And on this, I would like to go back to my previous question, which is the upcoming NATO summit in The Hague at the end of the month was mentioned before. And one of the big questions there is also how the partnership with the Indo-Pacific region will be reframed into the NATO context, if it will be reframed somehow. But of course, with the new administration in the United States, this is a big question mark, especially because the administration has pushed very hard in terms of asking, Europeans to focus on Europe and on the main challenges that are challenging the Europe theater, if you want, and at the same time asking the Indo-Pacific countries and the main partners there, being Japan, being South Korea, to then take care of their own region. So we are confronted with this challenge, right, where we have our main security provider, being the United States, asking us to focus on our respective region, which goes a bit against everything we've been discussing so far, which is how can we further cooperate? So the question I have for you is basically, do you see a way in which we can try to reconcile these two challenges? So on the one hand, the need to focus on our own region and protect our own region, and at the same time preserve the cooperation, at least with the like-minded partners that can be, as we discussed so far, be useful also for us in terms of further developing the technologies, for example, or helping us in moving towards a more positive model of cooperation, right? Because together we have the resources to propose something that is more positive towards also countries that are maybe a bit far from us, but with whom we need to engage. So maybe just, there are two more questions. Okay, maybe just if we can focus on this briefly in the final round. So your expectations from the NATO summit, and then I collect two more, and then we'll need to wrap it up. I think one is, yeah.
Okay, this one's working. Hello, my name is Fabian Müller. I'm with the German Embassy here in Rome. And I was wondering, against the backdrop of a proliferation of economic corridors in the last 10 years or so, if you look at the CPEC with China and Pakistan cooperating, and the port in Gwadar, the new IMEC cooperation, including the Mediterranean area, also the more famous Belt and Road Initiative, what potential for spillover do you see with these economic corridors into security fields, into security cooperation, security assistance, and how could the interplay of these corridors affect the regional dynamics? I think it's a rather general question, but I think there are particularly two panelists that have either published on this or spoken on it extensively, with Ms. Sanchez Caicedo and Mr. Sorry, I was butchering the pronunciation. Thank you very much. I think that's the question for now.
Thank you, very clear. And I see one also there on the back, on the very back.
Hello, Matthew Robinson, Director of the Euro-Gulf Information Center here in Rome. My question is a little outside the box and quite specific, relating to the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean, and this has dominated the political conversation in the United Kingdom as the recent government's decision to forego sovereignty to Mauritius. What type of vulnerabilities, if any, can you expect over the course of the next couple of decades, as what has traditionally been a key strategic listening post, both through the Americans and the British in that area? And can you forego any weaknesses as to the treaty that's expected to be concluded by the end of the year, of which there are hosts as it relates to permissions for the Mauritius government as it relates to British and American military operations in that region? And at Diego Garcia.
Thank you. I think there was one more. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting to hear about, the Indo-Pacific area, because, of course, there are great differences between Europe and, I suspect, the rest of the world. I am Alessandro Politi, the director of the Nato Defense College Foundation. The problem is not just like-minded people. That's complicated but easy. The problem is to work with non-like-minded people. And that's exactly what NATO did with the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact during the Cold War. So how much really important actors are ready to apply the Harmel doctrine, which is of the 60s, so not really a very happy period of the Cold War, deterrence and dialogue, which is a word that seems to be a bit lost, in translation. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. We have very little time left, so maybe if you can wrap it up in 1-2 minutes max. Maybe we'll start with you. Yeah.
Yeah, so very quickly, I couldn't agree more with the director. I think deterrence dialogue is the big play. I think you'll see this at upcoming NATO summit. President Trump likes to say the same thing that President Reagan used to say about peace through strength. 5% is a big deal. America's ability to project power in the Pacific is directly related to the strength of NATO in the North Atlantic. So it cannot be detached. In fact, if you were to see an American president spend area on some topic, is the one he says, I don't want to spend on. Obama saying, I don't want to spend in Middle East. He spent most of his time in Middle East. Trump says, I want to do Indo-Pacific. He talked to Putin 10 times more than he has talked to the Quad Prime Minister. So you see where the focus is. Now, very quickly on that, Chagos Island, I don't see any big change on it recently right now. I think the deal has been done. Both UK and US have signed off on it. But it raised the issue of Indo-Pacific's Indian Ocean strategy. I've written that we need an Indian Ocean strategy from America and also a NATO that addresses the choke points in Indian Ocean from the Straits of Malabar to all the way to Hormuz and down in the Madagascar. And it's very, very important that those positions are well taken care of. They're not at the moment. IMEC, and this morning you're going to have Deborah Bergamini giving the concluding talk. She and I were there all the morning today in the Parliament talking about the India-Middle East-Europe corridor. The most important thing is linking of the free and open spaces of free and open Indo-Pacific to the free and open Mid-Atlantic. The way it gets linked up is to the Indo-Mediterranean Trade and Security Pact, of which IMEC is the most dominant player. And I think IMEC, unlike BRI, has much stronger economic and political fundamentals of 8 countries, all of them on the same panel, no big country, small country stuff, everyone rich enough to take care of their jurisdiction, not dependent on some others. And to that when people also say we're not doing multilateralism, we're actually doing it. It's just the different iterations of multilateralism than the previous one. World is sort of shifting in that direction. But other thing concretely is AUKUS. This new president is going to oversee the AUKUS. But the most important way most tangible, practical way of coordination is Pillar 2 and AUKUS. That is the way where we're going to do collective security in the Indo-Pacific, and that's also the way for a lot of NATO member countries can partake in it as we go forward. Over.
Good. Thank you very much. Would you like to go next?
Very, very quickly. I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that the US may pull out of AUKUS. So just to say, I hope not. On connectivity, that's something I know more about. Indeed, I think there's a direct correlation and there are security effects. I was going to give examples of how a lot of these corridors are also a lot about geoeconomics, really, at the end of the day, and they do affect critical infrastructure, ports building, energy security. China's Maritime Silk Road was a massive trigger to other connectivity initiatives as much as we try to not accept this. India's IPOI, even I would argue to a large extent to the EU's global gateway. So I think that there is a component, but not only hard security, I would argue more non-traditional also. And what I mentioned before about illegal fishing, piracy issues, protecting exclusive economic zones, maritime safety, I think there's a lot there linked to connectivity and security.
Christina next, and then.
This is in response to Dr. Politti's point about deterrence and dialogue. That's very important. That's why NATO has cooperative security. We have I call it sort of partnership of choice and partnership of necessity. We cooperate with like-minded value, sort of similar shared value partners, and these are just partnership of choice. Partnership of necessity is based on important mutual, sort of interest-based issues like transnational threats, arresting WMD proliferation or counterterrorism. And we have partners. We have partners with some autocratic states in the Middle East, and that's okay. And we also have NATO has also cooperated with China in anti-piracy operations in the Gulf of Aden. China actually coordinated with NATO's Operation Ocean Shield for anti-piracy. So these are partnership of necessity. And that supports deterrence and dialogue, and we should always maintain deterrence and dialogue. In terms of the point about how do we maintain, how does Asia and Europe take care of its own backyard and still maintain transatlantic cohesion? That's also where cooperative security comes in, because instead of having a division of labor and just U.S. pivoting, the Asia pivot, with cooperative security, U.S. and EU can pivot together to Asia on these cooperative security issues with IP4, with Taiwan and India. So I think that's one way to maintain cohesion while stepping up on sort of own regional backyard.
Good. Thank you, Walter.
Thank you.
Concluding remarks.
Very, very quickly, I will take it from the combo, deterrence and dialogue. Once again, the second part of it, dialogue, is essential for a reason. Because if we don't get it with those who are outside the border of our own partnership, we will not definitely succeed in creating an effective partnership in order to increase the security of the Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific and Euro-Atlantic area, because we can no longer call it, sorry Julie to contradict you when you say our own space. I don't think our own now defines a single space, it defines a much larger environment, and this environment is what some Italian politician loves to call recently the Mediterraneo globale, so the global Mediterranean, which is exactly what we are looking at, a space where we can converge in order to create interest-based and target-oriented project and partnership. So the key remains defining measurable targets, finding a better way to use the existing tools. We do not necessarily need to renew everything. And in a way, we need also to create a narrative that can be useful in order to dismantle other ones that are promising a lot. And here comes the comparison between IMEC and BRI that you just mentioned, because through BRI, we heard a lot of promises, we heard a lot of projects. We haven't seen as much as they were promised. So there is a problem in filling the expectation. We can make it through, again, perhaps restricting and targeted, but measurable and effective partnerships. So I think this is my observation.
Perfect way to conclude, also because we are running out of time. I'm not sure we responded really to the how question, but at least we unpack it further, right? And we know a bit more about what are the challenges. The great news is that there will be other fantastic panels that will try to respond to all these questions. So please stay with us, engage also in the next panel. And let me just conclude by thanking our panelists, of course, for thanking you also for engaging with several questions. And of course, to thank also the NATO Foundation, Nato Defense College, and all the other partners that supported this great initiative. It's great to have these discussions also outside Brussels sometimes. Thank you very much, and please stay with us for the next panel.
Anything?
You never know. It's always good to check.
Eccoci di nuovo in diretta qui dalla conferenza sull'Indo-Pacifico organizzata dalla Nato Defense College Foundation. Abbiamo appena ascoltato il primo panel di questo pomeriggio. Questo panel è stato dedicato alle partnership fra la Nato e i paesi della regione. Abbiamo sentito le prospettive di esperti ovviamente che vengono da diverse parti del mondo, soprattutto India, soprattutto Taiwan e Giappone, ovviamente all'interno degli speech iniziali con Ken Kitatani. Fra poco sentiremo alcuni di questi panelist qui per delle interviste più approfondite, e la cosa interessante di questo panel appunto è che le sfide per la Nato oggi riguardano quello che è stato definito il Mediterraneo globale, cioè un mondo che non si limita più al nostro vicinato, quello che si considera fino adesso il Mediterraneo allargato, quindi l'area del Sud Europa, del Nord Africa, del Medio Oriente fino al Sahel, ma effettivamente soprattutto attraverso quello che si chiama oggi IMEC, il corridoio che parte dall'India, passa per il Medio Oriente e arriva al Mediterraneo. Le connessioni sono molto più ampie e stanno iniziando a diventare delle connessioni infrastrutturali. IMEC, di cui in Italia c'è Francesco Talò come ambasciatore e come inviato speciale, è una rete che si sta costruendo. Oggi a Roma c'è stato un altro evento molto importante ospitato dal ministro Tajani proprio per parlare di IMEC, con alcuni degli speaker che sono oggi pomeriggio qui alla conferenza della Nato Defense College Foundation, e attraverso IMEC si costruirà un legame commerciale, un legame di connessioni anche di cavi sottomarini, un legame strategico e anche di difesa per rafforzare un quadrante che oggi vede delle collaborazioni spot fra i paesi, ma che non hanno al momento una stabilità e una strutturalità. L'obiettivo quindi è parlare con l'India in particolare, ma arrivare fino a tutta la regione che include ovviamente anche il Giappone, la Corea del Sud, fino all'Australia, e interagire con tutti i vari formati che sono già stati creati in questa regione. Pensiamo al Quad, appunto, che include dei paesi come l'India e gli Stati Uniti, AUKUS, che vede l'Australia, il Regno Unito e gli Stati Uniti di nuovo al centro di un'alleanza anche militare, e quindi sì, questa serie di acronimi raccontano però un mondo che si sta sviluppando di nuove alleanze, di nuovi legami che ovviamente hanno tutti un po' come centro l'espansione della Cina. Ovviamente questi formati IMEC, Quad, AUKUS sono pensati come contraltare alla Cina, che, ricordiamolo, negli ultimi 20 anni è diventato il principale partner commerciale di moltissimi paesi di quello che si chiama il Sud globale, e non solo, perché anche del Nord globale la Cina è uno dei principali e spesso il principale alleato. Penso che tra poco riceveremo tra di noi una serie di ospiti che stanno arrivando. Ecco, stavo dicendo, il discorso di queste alleanze e un po' il grande convitato di pietra di questi incontri è proprio la Cina, che è stato uno degli argomenti principali trattati dagli speaker, perché ovviamente la Cina ha creato un suo network di alleanze. Ovviamente ci sono i BRICS, l'alleanza in cui ci sono il Brasile, la Russia, l'India, la Cina e il Sudafrica, e la SCO, la Shanghai Cooperation Organization, che è un'organizzazione appunto che si riunisce annualmente e che vuole mettere la Cina al centro di una nuova rete di alleanze, e sono delle alleanze alle quali molti paesi vogliono far parte, perché un po' la grande questione di questi anni è che non esistono più dei blocchi così chiari come ai tempi della guerra fredda, i paesi non allineati. Oggi una serie di attori di queste alleanze, pensiamo all'Arabia Saudita, pensiamo all'Indonesia, pensiamo a una serie di altri paesi come il Sudafrica, appunto, hanno l'interesse a mantenere un po' i due piedi in due staffe. L'idea è che non c'è più un'appartenenza così forte a delle alleanze indistruttibili, e quindi la Nato, che invece è un'alleanza molto forte e che si regge dall'indomani della Seconda Guerra Mondiale, ha bisogno di costruire un legame sempre più forte con i paesi sia like-minded, e questo si è detto anche in questo panel, quindi i paesi che hanno una simile mentalità, un simile approccio democratico, liberale, ma anche con i paesi che hanno un tasso, diciamo, di autoritarismo maggiore, perché questo si vede ad esempio con le alleanze nel Golfo, con i rapporti con i paesi appunto del sud-est asiatico. C'è una grande richiesta di collaborazione e quindi non si guarda troppo sul sottile anche alle questioni di che tipo di governo regge questi paesi, ma si è aperti a un approccio più inclusivo proprio in chiave di contenimento della Cina. Vi do appuntamento fra pochissimo per le prime interviste dopo questo primo panel. Grazie. And we're back. We have been joined by Christina Lin. She's a senior non-resident fellow at the Nato Defense College. Welcome. Thank you for being with us. So my question for you is related to Taiwan. We are now seeing a lot of interest in the international community on what is happening with Iran. Of course, there's the the invasion of Ukraine still going. We have, of course, the Gaza situation. Do you think that in this context of the United States and the international community distracted by these recent events, is China taking advantage and becoming even more assertive towards Taiwan? And do you think that there has been a shift lately in terms of how its actions and its moves in the sea are becoming even more, dangerous and visible?
No, I don't think China is becoming more assertive to Taiwan in the region. It's still sort of status quo, and it doesn't distract from, or it doesn't. Iran and Israel war doesn't detract from sort of the tension and cross-strait security in the Indo-Pacific, especially in terms of semiconductor security, because Taiwan TSMC has a near monopolistic position of advanced semiconductors in the world, over % of world supply. So, and even the chairman C.C. Wei was in the White House. He met Trump when they offer the investment in Arizona. So I don't think this is just a distraction or a detraction from cross-strait issues, and I don't think China's taking advantage of it. Maybe the news report from Western press they're sort of speaking about these terms, but in the Indo-Pacific region, I think it's still sort of the same issue, same status quo.
And do you see Europe becoming more aware of the risks concerning the security of Taiwan and the stability of the quadrant that is, of course, because that is a key quadrant that has effects on global trade, but also on the security and stability of the Korean Peninsula on one side and then Japanese archipelago on the other side. So do you think, working for the Nato Defense College and coming to these conferences, do you think that there is now more awareness and more rational and practical approach to the issue of Taiwan concerning Europe?
I think so. I mean, in my presentation, I mentioned that the first time NATO mentioned China was back in 2019. So China cross-strait issue has been on the radar of EU for quite a couple of years now. And then especially in terms of Taiwan, its semiconductor prowess, that was launched on the global stage in 2020 in the COVID pandemic with the shortage of the auto chips. So yes, Europeans are more aware, more cognizant of Taiwan. That's why even I'm here today speaking about Taiwan potential cooperative security partnership with Taiwan on technology, especially building a resilient semiconductor supply chain. We can learn a lot from Taiwan since it is the leader in semiconductor manufacturing, and they've set up ESMC, right? Friend-shoring countries, ESMC interested, and also in Arizona and Japan. And there are some challenges with setting up an ecosystem, a semiconductor ecosystem. And this is important. The computer chips, that goes into all the advanced technology, whether it's AI or Internet of Things or Joint Strike Fighter. They can't function without the computer chips, with these chips. So this is foundational. This is foundational security for modern economy. So I think there's been a higher level of awareness of the importance of Taiwan, not just in terms of its semiconductor manufacturing capacity, but also its geographic location and its value added as a like-minded value-based alliance, a thriving democracy with rule of law and advanced economy. So that's still important for NATO as a value-based alliance, which doesn't get much mention in the press, but it is important.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you. So we will be right back with you in a few moments.
Thank you very much. Yes, madam. Yes, definitely. No, I have a pocket. It's okay. Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay. This, yes. You ladies, yes.
Eccoci, siamo di nuovo qui alla conferenza della Nato Defense College Foundation. Mi ha raggiunto Gabriele Abbondanza, che avevamo ascoltato anche nella scorsa occasione. Si parla di conflitti e minacce ibride nell'Indo-Pacifico, è il tema del panel che seguirà a breve, quindi chiedo al professor Abbondanza quali sono queste minacce ibride e come si possono contrastare.
Grazie della domanda. Le minacce ibride in sostanza sono quelle che mettono assieme le minacce convenzionali, quelle che conosciamo bene, quelle della guerra fredda per intenderci, con le minacce non convenzionali, quindi la coercizione economica, gli attacchi cibernetici, i deepfakes creati con l'intelligenza artificiale e molti altri. Ecco, l'Indo-Pacifico è una regione importantissima per molte ragioni, una di queste è perché gli attacchi ibridi sono oramai all'ordine del giorno. Di conseguenza bisogna incrementare la capacità di resilienza degli stati e delle organizzazioni regionali e bisogna anche pensare in maniera abbastanza costruttiva e forse anche creativa, creando nuovi centri che possano aiutare gli stati e le organizzazioni della regione a contrastare queste nuove minacce, perché sono nuove e sono sempre più numerose.
Ecco, l'idea di creare dei centri, delle nuove istituzioni, ci sono degli esempi, sappiamo appunto in Francia c'è Viginum, abbiamo degli esempi in Europa, in Svezia, ad esempio si occupa proprio di guerra psicologica, per esempio c'è un istituto che si occupa proprio di guerra psicologica. C'è però la paura in molti paesi che questo possa diventare la polizia del pensiero, che questo possa diventare anche un modo per le istituzioni di controllare quello che si può dire e quello che non si può dire. Come si cammina su questa linea fra disinformazione e dall'altra parte la necessità di avere una libertà maggiore di espressione?
Certo, aumentando la consapevolezza di quello che sta accadendo. Noi siamo isolati in parte in quanto democrazia liberale, quindi sentiamo meno quello che accade nell'Indo-Pacifico. Quello che però accade nell'Indo-Pacifico poi ha riverberi anche in Europa, lo sappiamo benissimo. Creare, per esempio, e questo è il punto del mio intervento oggi, un nuovo Center of Excellence, quindi un centro di eccellenza secondo la nomenclatura dell'Unione Europea e della Nato nell'Indo-Pacifico per contrastare gli attacchi ibridi, è un'idea importante, è un'idea abbastanza innovativa, è un'idea che permetterebbe di aiutare i paesi e le istituzioni a fronteggiare queste minacce in maniera cooperativa, senza escludere nessuno, ma includendo quanto più attori possibili.
Grazie mille. Allora, buona conferenza, tra poco sul panel sulle minacce ibride. Grazie. E adesso chiamerei Ken Kitatani. We're going to be joined by Ken Kitatani, who spoke on the previous panel. And hello, welcome, please. So please join me here. So you spoke before. Ken Kitatani is Chief of Executive Board and Committee of the International Council on Environmental Economics and Development. You're based in New York, but you're an expert, of course, also on Japan and NATO relationship. I find very interesting the fact that there is a awareness now in Europe on the importance of the links between Europe, NATO, and Japan. Japan is also shifting its stance in the past few years. It's been more proactive, more ready to engage also on the security and military level. So what do you see going forward, this relationship between NATO and Japan, and between Europe and Japan on the security side, on the military side?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think there are many parts to the answer to this question. But fundamentally, all of these types of dialogues and these new types of discussions have come about since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which changed the geopolitical atmosphere and theater of the entire world, where at that time people were talking more about multilateralism, climate change, and what we can do to overcome these types of softer issues. But since the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, It completely shifted the geopolitical reality to economic security questions and also national security. As a result of this heightened the tension in the Indo-Pacific region, especially in the Far East, in the existing tension between China, Japan, South Korea, and other nations. In particular, again, the threat of the potential threat of China. As a result of this, and at the same time, because of the Trump administration threatening to withdraw from NATO, this has enhanced and accelerated the decision of the European nations to really step up to the plate to gain greater independence. And as a result of this, this was a successful, I think, strategic move on by Trump, even though after he hit Trump 2.0, we came to see the result of this, where many of the European nations have decided to contribute more to the NATO contributions. At the same time, in Japan and also in the Far East, this has encouraged and accelerated the need and the discussion for forming greater partnerships amongst countries that are promoting democracy and international rule of law. In the same way, somewhat mirroring, let's say, the NATO alliance. But as many people have been talking about today, you cannot just copy-paste this NATO model in the Far East. What's probably going to happen is there will be some type of Indo-Pacific alliance that will be formed, independent of NATO, but at the same time having discussion and contribution and also partnerships with the NATO itself.
So do you think that this new set of alliances and organization is going to be able to be as attractive as some of the up-and-coming organizations that we are seeing today, like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or the BRICS group, coming from Europe? And Professor Abondanza was also talking about hybrid threat, because I think that part of the hybrid threat is also the projection of strength, of an image of more effectiveness by the non-democratic bloc. And so do you think that you are, of course, an expert on environmental issues, and which was an issue up until a few months ago that would be uniting for different areas of the world?
Sorry for kind of attacking you, but I was like... Yes, of course, like... Ding, ding. Yeah, give me some concretes, exactly. I have no idea if it's like first the intervention and then our panel. Yeah, but like we are missing this gentleman from India, right? Special intervention. No, he was never to arrive, so like we're like, okay, so should we start now, or we have him, or we don't know. We don't know.
So this will be before, and then after that I still have 1 hour for the panel? Okay. So it can go a bit over then.
Ogni giorno i professionisti di ANT curano gratuitamente i malati di tumore a casa, con impegno e amore. Tutti noi possiamo fare la differenza. Con 5 per 1000 danti, la tua firma
is Indiana University and visiting professor of the Purdue University. Please, Ambassador.
Oh, so he's here. Sorry, pardon me. He's
then
here,
we will
apparently.
have the panel as per program.
Yours. Bad people.
Well, good afternoon. I was supposed to speak before the coffee, but it looks like I didn't mind it too much because I was quite happy to have my coffee and then spoke to speak to you. So, first, let me thank Ambassador Alessandro Mineto-Rizzo, who's a very old friend of mine, and it's thanks to him that I'm here to attend and speak at this conference. So, distinguished speakers, colleagues and friends, I hope to elucidate the origin and development of India's policy on the Indo-Pacific. In a way, it could not be Indo-Pacific without the presence of India. What's more, it is thanks to President Trump in his first term who actually converted it from the Asia-Pacific to the Indo-Pacific. It recognized the vital role of the Indian Ocean as an ocean of transit and a crucial sea route for global commerce and energy transportation. It is a key area connecting the economies of the Middle East, Africa, South and Southeast Asia, and beyond. India commands a dominant position in the Indian Ocean. It is a matter of conjecture if President Trump in his second term, his current term, would devote the required resources and strength to building the Indo-Pacific region in order to offset China's aggressive positions in the region. Apart from President Trump's weaponization of tariffs, the world last week has changed beyond recognition. The likelihood of the Indo-Pacific ever getting the resources and the military strength needed has become moot.
This is the starter, or
the raging war between Israel and Iran,
anything. I thought they were going to do it in the back.
while Israel still continues fighting Hamas,
I would say
with military forays into Syria, it appears to be it is dependent largely on Israel's attempt at regional domination of the Middle East. And while all this is happening, it continues to have the support of the United States. In parallel, we have intensification of the Russia-Ukraine war, now in its third year, with cleavages in domestic opinion on the war divided on political lines in Europe as well as the United States. President Trump continues to pitch for a settlement of the war on an as-is, where-is basis, which is of course anathema to President Zelensky. In this background, it is highly unlikely that the major powers will have the wherewithal to tackle the developing problems in the Indo-Pacific region. The growing tensions on the flashpoints in the region, the South China Sea, the Korean Peninsula, on the Taiwan Straits as well. The Indo-Pacific region confronts a widening security vacuum. We can expect that Washington's allies and close partners, Japan, the Philippines, South Korea, and Taiwan, face great uncertainty due to President Trump's unpredictable and transactional approach to diplomacy. the reliability of the US to honor its security commitments is in question. Without a robust commitment to collective defense, the Indo-Pacific is on a path of instability and conflict. I'm sorry, it sounds a bit like being the devil's advocate, but these are the realities we do face. Tactical shifts aside, Beijing's geopolitical aspirations for the greater juvenation of the Chinese nation remains unchanged. China seeks to prepare to seize Taiwan by 2026, as per a news report, control the South China Sea, and weaken US alliances, and ultimately dominate the region. I agree with Mr. Kaush Ara, who said that we have to find a way to talk to China. We means NATO. But I can tell you that India has tried to find many ways to talk to China.
The closing remarks
has experienced,
so the three in a row.
has been experienced by Japan, the Philippines, and Australia. With their unveiling of three-way defense cooperation and the convergence of their interests and action, the time may be ripe for the US to propose a collective defense pact with three partners to start with: Australia, Japan, and Philippines, and of course the United States. It would of course involve greater burden sharing by those allies. The real question remains is whether President Trump will take ownership of this proposal. If it does go ahead, later members could be South Korea, New Zealand, and possibly at some stage India and Singapore. India sees the Indian Ocean Rim Association, comprising countries of the littoral and other powers with strategic interest in the region, as an opportunity to foster a free, open, and inclusive region with a focus on economic growth, strategic cooperation, and maritime security. Concepts which are being challenged almost daily by the PRC. Inevitably, the four major Asia-Pacific powers, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea, when forming their policy in and towards the region, in response to PRC's growing assertiveness, have taken the Indian position into account. The quadrilateral dialogue, or Quad, including US, India, Japan, and Australia, was the result. Again, Mr. Ara has made it clear what the Quad has not done, rather than what it has done. For its part, in confronting the concept of Indo-Pacific, India was in a dilemma. While not wanting to be part of a strategy to contain China, even though it realized that it undermines its position in the neighborhood, India is equally cognizant of the need to be part of a new security environment that would provide it a platform to maximize its presence in an area of vital strategic interest. India's approach towards the Indo-Pacific has been shaped by the rise of China in the Indian Ocean region and South Asia. Beijing's expanding presence across the region presents a common strategic challenge for Canberra, New Delhi, Tokyo, and Washington. It was only in Prime Minister Modi's address to the 2018 Shangri-La Dialogue that the framework of India's Indo-Pacific priorities, concerns, and challenges began to emerge. It confirmed India's geographic definition of the Indo-Pacific as being from the shores of Africa to the Americas, providing a broad physical boundary for its calibrations. India's vision for the Indo-Pacific contains four elements. First is the importance of partnerships and the benefit of collaboration. Second, to distance India from any groupings or alliances of containment as a message to India's smaller neighbors and partners, to avoid getting caught between a Sino-Indian or a Sino-US geopolitical rivalry. It would position India to address the need to stabilize a hostile environment in its neighborhood. Third, given that the foundations of the global order are in flux, India emphasizes the need for expanding partnerships based on an order that was free, open, and inclusive. Fourth, India puts ASEAN at the heart of its Indo-Pacific vision, believing that in the changing world order, India must be one of the founding pillars. India, through increasing collaboration and real partnerships, has been able to expand its role in the wide region. US, Australia, France, and Japan have become New Delhi's pillars for Indo-Pacific partnerships. It has also extended its collaboration with other players in Africa, Indonesia, Oman, and Singapore in Asia, and the European Union. India has a critical group of partnerships with island communities across the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, reaching as far as the Caribbean. In the current context, India's management of its relationship with Iran and Russia will shape its own priorities in the larger security architecture. Beijing's ambition will nevertheless undermine India's strategic interests, and it will remain at the forefront of India's strategic challenges. As key partners in the Indo-Pacific move forward, they will have to accept that their respective Indo-Pacific visions will never mutually align completely. Increasingly value-based and shared interests will have to become the basis for partnership. It will also acknowledge the difference in priorities, theaters, and regional dynamics, given that each nation has a different appetite and available resources, while their threat perception also differs. Finally, India will also be faced with complex and challenging questions. More often than not, India will find itself in a position of having to balance its relationships with strategic partners like it had to do in the Ukraine-Russia war. Often India's strategic interests might appear to conflict with its traditional posture of strategic autonomy. Here again, I'll refer to Mr. Ara's comment of whether actually India's strategic autonomy increases by having more partners who give it strength. This is again a question that needs long consideration. Going forward, India's actions and deliverables in the Indo-Pacific will lay the foundation for its role in a new global architecture. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Alexandra Sakaki. I'm Deputy Head of the Asia Division at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, where I focus mostly on Japan's defense and security policies, but also broader Indo-Pacific issues. One note on timekeeping, you may have noticed that the schedule was shifted with the intervention after the break. I will give the panel 1 hour as was originally scheduled, so we're going to run a bit later than originally planned. And I also want to already tell you that we will have the closing remarks right after that. The panel that we have here now is going to focus on hybrid warfare, which, as the panel description in the program rightly points out, has been around for quite some time. But we see that the intensity and scale of challenges is increasing. We see increasing number of cyber attacks, disinformation, economic coercion, physical attacks also, sabotage against critical infrastructure, as was already set out in the previous panels. So NATO has been paying more attention, including with the partnerships with the IP4 countries. And we're going to look in this panel at specifically what are the challenges in both regions, and also how could cooperation move forward, which was a leftover from the first session to get into more concrete cooperation areas. Let me introduce briefly the three speakers that we have for this panel. We have from Japan, Mihoko Matsubara. Mihoko is a chief cybersecurity strategist at NTT Corporation in Tokyo, and she also holds a number of affiliations with international think tanks such as the IISS and Pacific Forum CSIS. At NTT, one of Mihoko's responsibilities is expanding and strengthening the networks with global thought leaders in academia, government, industry, by sharing both entities and also Japan's experiences and efforts in cybersecurity. And Mihoko has also served the Japanese government in various capacities, for example, through government policy committees between 2014 and 2018. The second speaker that we have is Dr. Gabriel Abundanza. Gabriel is a Marie Curie Fellow at the University of Madrid and also Associate Researcher at the University of Sydney, where he got his PhD, and Associate Fellow at the Italian Institute for International Affairs. He specializes in Great and Middle Power theory, irregular migration, governance, Italian and Australian foreign and security policy, and the Indo-Pacific more broadly. Finally, we have Dr. Joanna Siqueira. Joanna is an expert in international law and the Indo-Pacific region. She is assistant professor at the War Studies University in Warsaw in Poland, and also a fellow at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. And she has been a NATO consultant for more than 4 years. And in fact, she recently published with other scholars a report for NATO Allied Command Transformation on the Sino-Russian cooperation, which I can highly recommend. Without further ado, I would like to hand over to Mihoko for her remarks. And yeah, the floor is yours.
So thank you so much for having me today. So I actually have some slides. Oh, great. Thank you so much. So great. So I'd like to share my Japanese perspective, because now we have an ongoing war in Ukraine, and we are very concerned about the potential conflict in the Taiwan Strait. So I'd like to connect how the lessons from the ongoing war in Ukraine can be applicable or non-applicable to potential conflict in the Taiwan Strait from the Japanese perspective. Okay, so why Taiwan crisis is relevant to European audiences? Of course, it's quite obvious and it's very relevant to the Indo-Pacific region, but why to the European audiences? So Dr. Christina Lin already talked a lot about some statistics from Taiwan. So Taiwan has been serving a great economic power to the European people and the countries. So Taiwan manufactures over 60% of global semiconductors in the global market and over 90% of advanced semiconductors in the global market. And more than that, over 20% of global trade are actually coming through the Taiwan Strait. So imagine what would happen to the global market or economy if anything happened to the Taiwan Strait. And also, did you know that 30,000 European citizens currently reside in Taiwan? Are you sure you can save and relocate all of the 30,000 European citizens safely and securely from Taiwan to Europe if anything happens to the Taiwan Strait? Just imagine that. So maybe we have less than 2 years if anything happened to that region. So it is called the Davidson window. So Admiral Philip Davidson, a former commander of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, stated during the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee in March 2021 that Taiwan is clearly one of their ambitions before that. And I think the threat is manifest during this decade, in fact, in the next 6 years, because he said back in 2021, so that is why it is called Davidson window in 2027. And there have been the repeated references to the year of 2027. It might be the deadlines for the Chinese to integrate Taiwan to the mainland of China. For instance, CIA Director William Burns and also the current commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Paparo, in 2025. And of course, the U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that very clearly during the Shangri-La dialogue in June 2025. But we haven't seen anything related to the potential conflict in the Taiwan Strait. Maybe actually already happening in the cyberspace. So is anybody who heard about the word boat typhoon? So there are some. So boat typhoon is actually the Chinese advanced state-sponsored cyber actor to launch cyber attacks against critical infrastructure services to disrupt in the case of the conflict in the Taiwan Strait. The ultimate goal is to cause chaos and also to create disruptions to the decision-making processes, and not only that, to deter and delay the deployment of U.S. forces to the region in the case of the conflict in the Taiwan Strait. And we've been already seeing that the boat typhoon has been already penetrating into the various networks of critical infrastructures in the United States and also in Singapore and also in India. And we haven't seen the boat typhoon cases in the mainland of Japan and also in Taiwan yet. But according to Cisco's their report back in March 2025, this year, actually stated that they have already seen the Chinese state-sponsored actors have been attacking Taiwanese critical infrastructure services, and their tactics and the targets are very similar to that of both typhoon. So it is very concerning, and we may have been already seeing potential precursors to the conflict in the Taiwan Strait. And not only that, we've been already seeing another indicator very concerning surrounding the Taiwanese mainland, submarine cable cuts. And I know that it is also a very concerning indications already happening in Europe. You've been already seeing more cable cuts near Europe. So this might be another cases we can share our lessons learned between the Indo-Pacific and Europe. And actually the submarine cables are more frequently cut near the Taiwan compared to the rest of the world. So I know that it can happen anywhere in the world, anytime, but it's not straight that actually it happens more frequently near the Taiwan Strait. And actually the frequency has gone up this year. Why? So what are the lessons to learn and looking ahead from the ongoing war in Ukraine, and also applicable and non-applicable to the potential conflict in the Taiwan Strait? So looking at the Ukraine, I think that the long-term cyber defense buildup is absolutely necessity. So the Ukraine has took advantage of 8 years between the 2014 and 2022 to advance their cyber defenses. And also they had early warnings to defend Ukraine way before Russia invaded to Ukraine in February 2022. But this might not be applicable to Taiwan, because there the difference between the geography between the Europe and Taiwan islands versus continent. And if China is carefully observing what's happening in Ukraine, they may not want to give any early warnings and to give time for Taiwanese or Americans and the Japanese to prepare for potential invasions. And also, because Ukraine is on the continent, and they didn't have to worry too much about submarine cables cut. But Japan and Taiwan are already dependent on the 90% of their communications through the submarine cables. So I think this is a time for the Indo-Pacific people and the European countries to share potential lessons learned from Ukraine, and also to prepare for potential conflict in the Taiwan Strait. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihoko, for pointing out especially Taiwan's situation and the worsening conditions. And as you said, there's actually already conflict in the cyberspace. I think that's important to take note of. We will turn to the next speaker, Gabriel, and move on with your input, please.
Fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. It's great to be back here at the NATO Foundation. I too would like to thank Ambassador Minuto Rizzo and President Politi, as well as Lorenza, Benedetta, the whole NATO Foundation staff, my colleagues, of course, and all of you for being here. So, hybrid warfare. Hybrid warfare is something that we will hear about increasingly in the future. Of course, the Indo-Pacific is a theater where such instances take place on a daily basis. Let me give you just a few examples from the past 5 years. We've had plenty of examples concerning the COVID-19 pandemic and its origin, its management and or mismanagement. We've had plenty of examples concerning hybrid warfare when it came to the China-India clashes, to the India-Pakistan clashes, of course. We've had countless examples when it came to Taiwan, a country that's been targeted countless times by Beijing with cyber attacks, with AI-generated deepfakes, with fully fledged military drills which resembled and simulated full-scale invasions, but we've also had hybrid warfare tactics applied to the narrative around the Fukushima wastewater debate, cyber espionage across the whole region. Anyone who lived and worked in the Indo-Pacific, not just me, there's plenty of people in this room, could tell you quite a few stories about that. New Caledonia and its unrest in 2024, which was aimed at destabilizing the French presence in the region, and the space dominion as well, which will be, make no mistake, the next venue when it comes to hybrid warfare. Thankfully, there are measures that are being taken to counter hybrid warfare in the Indo-Pacific, and this includes, somewhat surprisingly perhaps, even Europe. We all know that Europe joined the Indo-Pacific debate rather late. However, it is making up for lost time. Italy, for example, the country that is hosting us today, is a great example of how to make up for lost time by working steadily on normative, economic, and security trajectories with Indo-Pacific partners. Then we also have a proverbial elephant in the room. In this case, that's the United States, with its erratic and, we could say, potentially destabilizing foreign policy. However, the very existence of the Indo-Pacific 4 grouping and similar groupings is a way to partially, at least partially, offset this and to continue working with the United States, which is, of course, a crucial partner for both Europe and many Indo-Pacific allies and/or partners. All of which brings us to actual cooperation when it comes to hybrid warfare. And we have quite a few examples, starting with NATO. NATO recognizes hybrid warfare as a strategic challenge since the 2014 Russian invasion of Ukraine. Also, from the Wales NATO summit of 2014, it has been attested that large hybrid attacks, including very large cyber attacks alone, could potentially trigger Article 5. In 2018, NATO established its own counter-hybrid response teams, so NATO is, of course, quite well prepared. But there's the European Union as well, which took stock of the situation somewhat late. We all know that the European Union is not perfect, is not an extremely rapid supranational entity, and yet in 2022 it did acknowledge the existence of and the threat of hybrid warfare. It created and established the hybrid toolbox. It also established in 2024, so last year, a comparable hybrid response teams, which is, as I said, comparable to the NATO hybrid response team. And thankfully, there is cross-institutional cooperation as well, especially between NATO and the European Union. Not only because they share 23 member states, which is something we shouldn't really forget, but also because they have dozens and dozens of joint actions in the security field, about a fifth of which pertain to the hybrid sector. Now, all of this has led to something very tangible, the establishment of the European Counter-Hybrid Center of Excellence, which is located in Helsinki, in Finland, and provides support to partner countries with training courses, workshops, research papers, and many other valuable initiatives. So, my point is that something comparable could be established in the Indo-Pacific as well. This is a refresher of idea that's been voiced before, but it hasn't eventuated yet. I'd like to remind that centers of excellence, even those that pertain to the hybrid sphere, do not necessarily need to be hosted by NATO member countries. Finland was not a NATO member in 2017. And in my view, 5 main criteria should be attached to where and when and how we could establish an Indo-Pacific hybrid center. First of all, the ideal host country should be a member of NATO's interoperability platform, which has 21 members, 7 of which are Indo-Pacific countries. Secondly, ideally, this host country would be an IP4 country. We know the untapped potential concerning the Indo-Pacific and the Indo-Pacific 4 in particular. Third, once again, ideally, it should be a member of the Enhanced Opportunity Partnerships. These are countries that do more, voluntarily of course, do more often, and sometimes even more effectively. Fourth, we should look at the level of Indo-Pacific involvement and activism. Fifth, we should look at the actual potential contribution to counter hybrid threats that the potential host country could give to the alliance and to its partners. There are plenty, make no mistake, plenty of great candidates in the region. However, Australia is the only country that is a member of the interoperability platform, is the only country that is also an IP4 and is also an enhanced opportunity partner. More on this, Australia has a long and deep history of cooperating with NATO, and it is one of the staunchest advocates of the Indo-Pacific notion, possibly the staunchest alongside Japan. At the same time, Australia's relation with Southeast Asia and with the South Pacific are extremely deep and extremely broad, and all of this could indirectly benefit the alliance's goal and possibly even the European Union's goals in the Indo-Pacific. And relatedly, again, this is something that anyone can testify, Australia has been the target of hybrid attacks, mainly by China, but also by Russia and Iran, multiple times. Accordingly, and crucially, Australia has very well-developed anti-counter hybrid warfare capabilities, which could contribute to this idea, to this project that I'm advancing here with you today. In conclusion, hybrid warfare is extremely prominent in the Indo-Pacific. It will increasingly become prominent in the future. The idea of establishing an hybrid Indo-Pacific Center of Excellence would be beneficial to partner countries, not just to NATO members, of course, to all partner countries, and Australia could be the ideal candidate. On a concluding note, since we are, after all, in Rome, we are in Italy, I'd like to point out that Italy's very prominent role within the NATO alliance, its increasing role, quite substantial if you look at the main elements, in the Indo-Pacific, and its very warm relations with Australia could be facilitating elements in this respect. Well, that's it from me. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you, Gabriel, for serving a bit more of especially what is happening on the EU and NATO side, and also making a proposal of what could be further developed in terms of a center of excellence. We will come to Joanna for the last input on lawfare, and I hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Mr. President, I'm honored to be here. Organizing team, thank you for everything, and good to see old friends and meet new friends. Ladies and gents, I train armed forces within NATO, primarily Polish and American, but also Indian Navy. I'm a sailor myself. I sailed across Pacific. I did my PhD in New Zealand. I'm devoted to the Indo-Pacific. And what is so irritating for me that we are still blind, that there is a true Chinese threat for our democracies, for the way we live, for our freedoms of speech, our freedom of navigation, freedom of religion. Because I remember a few years back when Central Europeans, including my country, we were warning, hey, there is Russia, and Russia has this imperialistic approach. They have this appetite. Westerners were calling us Russophobes, laughing at us. Unfortunately, we were right. And now we are wondering, how about Chinese Communist Party with their approach, which is totally different for everything we stand for everything we are ready to defend. And again, from international law perspective, and I'm very honored that I can talk about international law, which is very often forgotten in debates about non-kinetic hybrid warfare. Everyone is still focusing on kinetic, sometimes cyber economy, but how about international law? And again, ladies and gents, Russia and China have mastered lawfare. They are experts in showing us how to maneuver within international law regulations, how to laugh at our treaties, our arrangements. And we are miserable, we are naive, and I will repeat that. I will repeat that because we must do something to change that. Ladies and gents, I will give you some examples, but I want you to see that law is already used as a weapon. And I know I always get negative comments from my colleagues, humanitarians, that how I dare to use weaponization of law term. But it's not me using this. I'm just describing the fact how Russia, China, and other terrorist organizations, they do use it international law, and they remain unpunished. Okay? In China, that's the only country so far who codified legal warfare in its doctrine. It started in 1990s, where two army colonels they wrote about the usage of international law, but also internal law. Just to remind you, 2020 in Hong Kong, we had umbrella revolution. And what happened after? Beijing changed the law without tanks. Guys, have you, I'm sure you read Sun Tzu, but maybe read it again, not as a fairy tale from Far East, but as a true strategy, one-to-one, how to lie, how to cheat, how to manipulate to achieve the goal without starting a kinetic war. We are preparing for that, okay? But what if I will tell you China is a different war criminal than Russia is? We must understand how enemy is thinking to counter it, because we, especially Europeans, we still hope that the enemy will follow the rules. No. Russia, Ukraine, how they tackled lawfare when Ukrainians were following every convention, Geneva, Hague, fantastic. And what Russians did when Ukrainians, they were notifying the hybrid corridors, Russian mined those corridors. When Ukrainians were putting dzieci, children, on the shelter according to humanitarian law, what Russians did, they bombed. I'm not saying not follow the law, but know that the enemy is not stupid. They also have good lawyers. Talibans, we were all laughing. Wow, what kind of regime is that? Ooh, very good. They had narcotics, and now they have what? Gold and diamonds. And they get along in international relations, okay? Coming back to China, San Zhong Zhan Fa. So 3 warfare doctrine. One is public opinion, another is psychological warfare, and final is my beloved lawfare. And they follow that. 2016 famous ruling of Permanent Arbitrary Tribunal, China and Philippines, saying China back off South China Sea. What China did? They did not listen. So what they are doing now, they are shooting water cannons at Filipinos. World is watching. They are doing international law war. Last year, China and India, 2 largest armies on the planet, they were fighting with what? Stick and stones. Stick and stones, 21st century. Why? Because they know the law. They didn't want to start an aggression with kinetic warfare. No, they used non-lethal weapon, not to be accused to be an aggressor. We must understand the mindset of the enemy. I can tell you the very short story when in good old days, US Navy and Chinese People's Republic Army Navy, they were training together, and the boys were having integration. So they were given a map, how to go through the hills with their full gear. And so Americans, they were following the map, they were sweating, and they went to the finish line last, seeing the Chinese, no sweat, no stains, relaxing. And they're like, we could have seen you on the way, but we have not. What happened? And Chinese went, it was not about following the rules, it was about winning. This is the mindset of understanding the law, of misusing the law. How ICC, International Criminal Court, we were so naive to issue an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin, where Russia is not a member of the court. We did that next year against NATO. Is Israel in the court? Is not. So we are not using international law as we should. There are tools, but I dare to say there is no political will to finally tackle all the tools we have to protect democracy, human rights, transparency of public administration, and freedom of speech. Thank you, ladies and gents.
Thank you, Joanna, for a rather sobering perspective on the use of lawfare by China and Russia and how we are not properly responding, perhaps, to that threat yet. I think those were all three very stimulating inputs. I'm sure there's a lot of questions, but I will abuse my role as a moderator to just ask one question to all of three and get your perspectives, and I'm also happy to collect further questions from the audience. One thing that I find really fascinating about the issue of hybrid warfare is that it is extremely difficult to respond for us Western countries, and that is because the opponent is deliberately using something that is blurring the lines between peace and war. It's also because attribution is very difficult. For example, proxies are often used. And also we have kind of a dilemma as Western countries how to respond. For example, if there's a sabotage in European countries, do we use counter-sabotage? No, we don't. So there's kind of an asymmetry in how we can respond to this. And so I'm interested in hearing your perspectives on how we can manage that dilemma. Should we focus on building resilience, on having deterrence by denial, essentially? Or should we go beyond that, thinking about deterrence by punishment or perhaps other methods that you can think of? I'm interested in hearing your perspectives. Let me check if there's maybe one or two questions that we can add to that, and then you can respond to that. I see one in the back.
Andrew McCarn from the RISI Center for Finance and Security in the US Irregular Warfare Center, and I look at economic levers and financial levers of power. Thanks to the panel for that excellent roundup across the range and also the mitigations with a centre of excellence for countering hybrid threats. And following up on Alexander's question is we look at these cyber attacks and us, the critical underwater infrastructure attacks, lawfare, but we sometimes talk about the economy, talk about finance, but we don't talk about economic statecraft as much as we should do. Economic warfare, financial warfare, I think that's tying with a more aggressive posture. So just my question to you is within that context of the lawfare, protecting CNI, CUI, countering hybrid threats, when we move from competition through that spectrum into conflict, where do you see the role for more understanding and more activity in economic levers and financial levers of power, the economic warfare, the financial warfare aspects of this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it links somewhat to my question as well, so I think you can have a go at both of those. And I see one more question that we will take now, and then we'll turn back to the panel.
Thank you very much. Three very interesting presentations. I would like to ask you something different, since we are working as a foundation on the concept of blended threats, where non-state actors have a very important part. Leave aside, please, the proxies. What is your view about, hybrid threats by non-state actors acting autonomously for their own interest? It could be not just terrorists, but organized crime, rogue companies. There is a wide area and galaxy in this. And lawfare, of course, at private level is, quite intense. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So further question also on responding, but to the non-state actors. Shall we go in the opposite order this time again?
Thank you for your question, for gentlemen, your two questions. I will maybe start from something which is funny, but unfortunately it is real. Do you know how NATO wants to tackle legal warfare? And there is official document, 3 pages. by issuing a brochure. Exactly. If there is already there that NATO's idea is to tackle legal operation, is to issue a brochure, I was like, wow, where are we? Where China and Russia are already in this, what you said, like private sector, so non-state actors. How about TikTok? We would be wondering, yeah, it's like just stupid, scrolling thing. No, guys, it's growing another generation of people who would be ashamed of belonging to Western civilization, where they see all those videos blaming Western civilization for all the wars, blaming them for, being devoted for a religion or a particular religion. In the US, we see that. Why there is this war about that? Because we are growing new generation of people who would never go and die for the country, for their values. And it's so cheap, it is so efficient, because whenever I go to the US, I stay with my friends, it's like, Joanna, look what our kids are doing. They're just watching that. And so it's so, they grow. The same in Russia. When I've been to Russia, and it's not Putin's war, people truly believe in that. They associate with them. The enemies, they are growing the next generation. What are we doing in Oceania? There is such a level of poverty. When Chinese enter and they offer ambulance or they build, a ground school, awesome. And Americans come and say, hey, we'll give you freedom. Come on, if I would be, Fijian or Tokelauan, I would be like, no, I prefer ambulance. I don't need your freedom. And where are we? What can we give other nations? How can we pragmatically show that if we invest now in the freedom, our children, grandchildren will have the same values what we have now? But so far, I think there is something missing here. Maybe I will give to my colleagues more to add. Gabriel?
I see your point. Well, yes, what to do with hybrid threats and how to practically tackle them, including, of course, economic warfare and economic coercion, which is one of the favorite tactics of the second largest economy on the planet. And why not? In their place, we would probably do the same. So what to do about that? As I mentioned in my brief speech, increasing resilience in partner countries is crucial. If we get out of this beautiful building and talk to the average Joe, which is walking by our beautiful city, they would probably not know how to define hybrid warfare, hybrid threats. So we need to bank much more on this, but in a way that eschews purely militaristic views, because otherwise we would simply miss our audience in a way that I'm hoping that I'm not doing right now, for example. So it's about increasing resilience, it's about increasing capacity building. So apart from engaging more and better the audiences out there, we also need to have the institutions that do that, and possibly they need to be funded much more, hence my proposal for a new center of excellence in the Indo-Pacific. We need to increase literacy on hybrid warfare. We need to increase the literacy on cyber attacks, on fake news, on artificial intelligence. This is not being taught in our schools. It should be, because after all, in 20 years' time, they will be the next ruling class, and if we don't give them, our kids, the tools that they need, it's not just us failing today, it's us failing tomorrow. In terms of economic warfare, I'd like to borrow some of the favorite bywords and keywords of the European Union, which is admittedly great at finding great concepts and frameworks, friendshoring and de-risking. These are two beautiful concepts which would be enormously effective if applied thoroughly. They aren't, however. We should invest much more in friendshoring and de-risking. The reason we're not doing that, of course, is because this has a cost. And in a particular time frame of the 21st century, where most of the global north, let's say, economies are somewhat stagnant, this is an even greater bet that policymakers are not willing to take. So I would say resilience, capacity buildings, literacy, including in school curricula, as well as friendshoring and de-risking. There is no silver bullet for what we are aiming for here, but I think that these are some potentially good initiatives.
Thank you, Mihoko.
Sure. I'd like to take your question about the deterrence by punishment and deterrence by denial. So I think that both combination would be ideal to respond to cyber attacks, but there are basically the two major types of cyber attacks. One is cyber espionage, and one is cyber disruptions to disrupt or distract your critical infrastructure services like electricity, hospitals, or telecommunication services. So I would say that most, over like 90% of cyber attacks are targeting low-hanging fruit, like end of services or end of life software or hardware, or like going through the known vulnerabilities that have been never patched. So if we as cyber defenders can patch everything and stop using end of life or end of services software and hardware, then I would say that we can make the life much harder for cyber attackers to launch cyber attacks, both cyber espionage and cyber disruptions to our critical infrastructure services and also our personal data and national defense related to intelligence. But in the end, it is also impossible for us to patch everything because again, cyber attackers are going through the low-hanging fruits, and 60% of cyber attackers are actually targeting small and medium-sized companies. Can we really expect that small and medium-sized companies can patch everything and can spend money on cyber defenses? No. And also that because in a hybrid warfare, cyber attackers also do cyber disruptions. So that is why Gabriel made a really great point. We need to raise the literacy of a hybrid warfare, including cyber defenses. And also, it is necessary for us to impose deterrence by punishment. But there's a difference between deterrence by punishment by kinetic attacks and also cyber attacks. So everybody in this room would know what can ballistic missiles and also nuclear weapons can do to human lives. But can you make a guess what can cyber attacks or cyber disruption can do to our lives? If we do a patching and a good cyber defenses, we cannot do a real calculation of what can cyber attacks can do to our lives. So that is why this deterrence by punishment is really difficult compared to kinetic attacks. Thank you.
Okay, I see that we're supposed to finish by 6:10 p.m. with this panel. So we have maybe 2 questions or so that we can still take, and we'll do a quick round of responses. One question over there.
Good afternoon. My name is Tullio Morganti. I'm a freelance consultant with having turned around the world for a few decades. I've heard very interesting statements, but one thing I noticed is that there is a tendency to look at the aggressive side of organizing relations. I'm not a pacifist. I'm not one who escapes from the concept of defending a country which is aggressed. But I believe that cooperation and interdependence can prevent largely any possible conflict. One other thing I would like to underline, I didn't hear any word about this new organization, which is the Indian Ocean Commission, which has the same aim, more or less, as the European Union had when it was funded. This is part of the Indo-Pacific region, but has a big advantage of involving also Southern African countries, 6 of them, not too many. What do you think about a future for this type of formula and this type of entente among the countries of the Indian Ocean, which is huge? Pacific and Indian are 2 huge areas to master and to control. Thank you.
Okay, any last 1 or 2 questions? Anything you would like to pose to the panel? Yeah, okay.
Yes, thank you very much for the panel, for the presentations. I would love to ask a question about NATO cybersecurity capabilities in 2025, considering hybrid threats from the Indo-Pacific, especially like China. How it is the NATO preparation at the moment, and how can NATO countries profit from hybrid threats and a correct response to Chinese or Eastern hybrid threats? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. I would like to hand back to the panel. Mihoku, maybe we can again go in the original order and start with you. And I leave it up to you to pick and choose the questions that you would like to respond to, and also perhaps respond to anything that your co-panelists have said.
So I'd like to respond to the second question about the NATO responses to the Chinese cyber attacks. So whenever I talk to European security experts or the European audiences, I tend to find that European countries are more concerned and also interested in responding to cyber attacks from Russia, rather than responding to cyber threats from North Korea or China. But these days, as we see in the ongoing war in Ukraine, Russia, China, and North Korea have been increasingly more collaborating on kinetic attacks and hybrid warfare. So I think this is a time for European countries and also the countries in the Indo-Pacific region, including Japan, to compare notes because in the Indo-Pacific countries have more expertise on responding to the threats from China and North Korea, and you have more expertise to responding to the threats from Russia. So we can collaborate or more, so we can do better responses to cyber warfare from different countries.
Okay, thank you, Gabriel.
Thanks for your questions. They are very centered on our debate. I agree with Mr. Morganti. We shouldn't focus too much on the so-called hard security. We are talking, after all, aren't we, about hybrid threats? Well, I think that we should have hybrid responses then. We should have hard security when it's necessary, and it is necessary, of course, but we should also have capacity and coalition building on common matters. And this is, I think, the correct first step towards addressing hybrid threats in a more mature and long-term effective way. As per the second question, the cyber capabilities of NATO, what are we doing to prepare? What's the current response? Well, it's difficult to answer because what revisionist states do is something rather inexpensive and also very effective. Pretty much everything that they do in the cyber domain is below the threshold of Article 5, which is, of course, very smart, and why would they do anything else? We do not respond in the same way. We do respond, but not to the same, with the same scale and with the same wide scope that they have. This is perhaps something that we should rethink, simply because of the reciprocity, which in international security is, of course, fundamental, and also because it is something that hasn't been done so far, always keeping in mind the will not to escalate too quickly. But again, if our rivals think outside of the box, why shouldn't we?
Right, Joanna.
I have a few words about this new organization because my doctorate was actually about Pacific regionalization, so that's spot on. I don't see it coming because for Oceania countries it's already spaghetti effect. It's unlike the other regional grouping, whether formalized as international organization or semi-formalized in Pacific. We have this multitude of different organizations, and also it's even this term of imposed law. Oceania people, they don't believe in our Western system of treaties and problems resolution. And the latest example is climate change, that they got so fed up with United Nations, who until now never issued a treaty about climate change, right? There was one document in 2021, but it was only stating that most countries who are not directly affected by climate change don't see a reason in establishing any treaty. So they started to act regionally. And by the way, that would be my present of a book to you, sir, but my luggage has been missing since this morning, so I hope tomorrow I will get it back. So again, to understand other legal cultures, how they tackle problem, it will not be how we do that in European Union through the shared norms. For them, it will be flipping off, their shoes, jumping under the tent, talking, and that would be legally binding. Because the terms of exclusive economic zones, or boundaries, or passports, this is our legal culture. So therefore, they are not convinced that our arrangements will save their sovereignty, their territory, their independence. Therefore, China is so effective in getting what they want, while still we, US, we expect them to play by our rules. This is not the way.
All right, thank you very much. I would like to thank all the organizers for putting together this wonderful panel, and please join me in thanking our...
And thank you to our moderator.
Thank you. This concludes the second session, and we will have the concluding remarks by Deborah Bergamini. Looking forward to that, and we will get off the stage.
Thank you very much, everybody. We had a very interesting afternoon, I think, covering a very, very wide space, perhaps even too much, I don't know. The Indo-Pacific is such a large area, and it's very difficult in a few hours to say relevant things. Anyway, I think it's very important. And now, to conclude our session today, the Honorable Deborah Bergamini is going to give the final remarks. She's a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Chamber of Deputies of Italy, with a strong focus, I think, and attention on security and international affairs. So, Onorevole, prego.
Grazie Presidente, Ambasciatore Minutorizzo, buonasera. Just a few remarks in order to conclude this very relevant session, first part of this important event, and I want to thank the NATO Foundation Defense College also for thinking that maybe I am the right person to do some final remarks for this first part. While listening to the last panel, unfortunately I wasn't able to come before because we had voting at the chamber. I was thinking that this morning the Chamber of Deputies in Rome hosted another important and relevant event regarding the IMEC, the Indo-Mediterranean, the so-called Indo-Mediterranean corridor. I was impressed by the quality of the debate and how many stakeholders, institutional, diplomatic, industrial, wanted to be there and participated actively in a debate trying to see how much the potential of the IMEC could change the future, not only for Italy, but for the whole of Europe and for the whole of the so-called enlarged Mediterranean. It has been an extremely fruitful and very compelling debate. Why do I say so? I say so because I think that, of course, we are now together in moments of critical relevance to all of us, seeing what's going on in all the region of the Middle East, seeing what's happening in these very hours. And probably the future to a person of my generation has never looked so dark. But then at the same time, I think that it's on our responsibility of all of us, all the fantastic experts that I have listened to, all of you, to try to shape this moment in the best form possible, meaning that we have to change radically our way to behave, to think, to be used to certain views or thoughts. And I say so because I am a long-term politician. I have been in the parliament for almost 20 years. I'm a member, active member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs. And I have seen the last 20 years of political life in my country, and I've seen so many changes. This one is the most incredible change I'm living, we're all living. And this calls to us. I really believe that a new global order is set to be established, but the problem is that this order cannot be written on paper, but must be constructed, built, and shaped together. One word that resonated along the debate and resonated this morning was interdependence or interconnection. We thought that globalization would have contributed to a mature sense of interconnection of all the populations in the world. That vision failed. It's not real anymore. The result of failed globalization, in the sense that we had written on paper, is that we are all experiencing growing tensions, growing conflicts, growing blended or hybrid threats to the liberty and quality of life of everybody in the world. So we need to find a new path. We need to believe in a different way. But we need to do it together. What I think is the lesson of failed globalization is that really we're all interconnected and really we need to cooperate in a different way. But we're saying this at the moment of the lowest level of cooperation we are experiencing since Second World War. So we are in a moment that is really double-faced, and this requires the best of us. Really the best of our efforts. Now, when it comes to my country, for example, I think that the awareness of how much interconnection is driving all of our lives is growing. And this is also thanks to some work that is being done by politics. For example, in the Committee of Foreign Affairs, we just approved a couple of months ago a very well done, in-depth analysis about potential and challenges of the Indo-Pacific region for what concerns Italy and Europe. And of course, the result of that very well done work has been that we need a strategy. We don't have it. It's been difficult already to become aware of what the Indo-Pacific is. The Indo-Pacific has 70% of global economic growth, 35% of global wealth, and will represent over half of the global GDP by 2050. This is the Indo-Pacific. And this is why it is a priority also to an apparently faraway country such as Italy, within the framework, of course, of EU and NATO. So we need a strategy. But Europe is dealing with some priorities that are interconnected to the Indo-Pacific, but not yet solved. Our new relation with the US, let's be frank, we need to reshape it. We need to become closer than we have been in the last few decades. We have been losing one another, and we have to rebuild that trust, that habit, and that mutual capability of seeing each other that are required to important allies. But at the same time, Europe is facing another problem, the problem of how much to be sincere with respect to the public opinion in order to the increased need of building up security, which is also military security. We're having a hard time as politicians. We don't know how much to graduate the message that we have to share with our public opinions in order to the perspective of the European Union, which I consider the most amazing, incredible, fascinating political architecture being built since Second World War. A visionary project. But again, stuck. And one of the key questions is common army. How do we deal with that? With public opinion that, because of the many complexities that are living in their lives, in the situation, in the ongoing situation, are asking only for peace and security and don't want to hear a single word with respect to army, weapons, war, conflicts. How much sincere shall we be? This is a major existential issue for the future of the European Union. So when I say that I'm a strong believer in the fact that now we are in need of a thorough change of attitude, this regards also the Indo-Pacific. Because it is true that within the Indo-Pacific dimension, we have more or less the same problems. If we need to learn again as Europe to defend ourselves, because NATO cannot do for everybody, as it has been so far, we will be focused on that. And before we solve that, we will be weaker in our political boost outside of our borders. If we are not clear about how we will deal with the common army or not, we will be weaker outside of our borders. There will be a real lack of strategy, whereas this is the moment where a strategy is mostly needed for Europe to be reinforced as a free part of the world that wants and is trying to advocate for freedom, liberty, democracy, rule of law. So the challenges are very, very big, very, very urgent. But because I'm a politician, I have to be optimistic, otherwise I'd rather change my job. I also think that also by listening to panels such as these that have taken place just now, or this morning at the IMEC Corridor event, or many other opportunities, or multilateral opportunities, I believe that we are learning, maybe slowly, maybe with some uncertainty, but we are starting to think in a different way. We are starting to really understand the true meaning of the word cooperation, which should be defense cooperation, industrial cooperation, cultural cooperation, knowledge cooperation. We are growing more and more aware that we are on the verge of a new world, a totally new world. And I don't forcibly think that the new world is going to be worse than the one that we are living. Actually, I'm a strong believer in technological innovation. I'm also a strong believer in artificial intelligence capabilities, provided that they are developed by liberal countries, not by authoritarian countries. I believe that the lesson of failed globalization has been learned. I believe that we are finding out that we humans, with all this technology, with all this complexity, are growing more aware and more intelligent, and maybe also more sensitive to what is real at the place of what is presented as real. So the challenge is huge, but I think that through an ongoing work that we're doing together, we will manage. So be ready. Let's all be ready for important choices, but also for a future that will give us more benefit than we probably expect today. Thank you.
So I think we all thank very much Deborah Bergamini for giving us a larger horizon than we thought at the beginning of this afternoon. So thank you very much. And this is the end of today's session. I think we have got a lot of new things. I think also even Ken looking at me, looking satisfied. Rajendra, I thank all the speakers, the moderators today. You've been very good. And this is the end of the session. Tomorrow, if you are still interested in the issue, 11 o'clock here, there will be another session with more interesting things to learn. Have a good evening.
Siamo di nuovo in diretta, è terminata ora la conferenza, il primo giorno di questa conferenza sull'Indo-Pacifico della Nato Defense College Foundation. Ci sono state le conclusioni dell'onorevole Deborah Bergamini, membro della Commissione Affari Esteri della Camera, e il saluto di Alessandro Minutorizzo. Fra poco saranno qui con noi per un commento finale su questa conferenza. In realtà domani mattina alle 11 ripartono i lavori per un'ora e mezza fino alle 12:30. Ci sarà un ulteriore panel in cui si parlerà di Stati Uniti e Cina e degli effetti che queste due potenze stanno avendo nella regione. Una regione che, come ha ricordato l'onorevole Bergamini, rappresenta il 70% della crescita economica globale. Questo è un tema che si è sentito spesso oggi. La crescita economica globale è oggi sinonimo di stabilità e di sicurezza di fatto, perché come abbiamo visto anche negli Stati Uniti, alcune politiche, pur della potenza più importante a livello globale, si fermano davanti alle richieste del mondo economico e alla incertezza causata da alcune scelte. Quindi noi abbiamo anche parlato di Taiwan e del fatto che Taiwan è un'isola fondamentale per la catena del valore globale in campo tecnologico, ma non solo, perché attraverso quelle acque passa una percentuale altissima dei container che portano le merci dall'Asia fino all'Europa. Quindi senza sicurezza regionale, soprattutto nell'area di Taiwan, salterebbero intere catene e filiere globali, portando una crisi economica senza precedenti. Quindi l'elemento economico come elemento centrale della sicurezza della regione, e però allo stesso tempo è importantissimo raccontare tutte quelle minacce ibride che in questo momento arrivano in Europa e condizionano le opinioni pubbliche europee, anche quando si parla di Cina, quando si parla di Asia, perché c'è in atto una campagna piuttosto forte appunto per delegittimare le democrazie liberali, per ridurne l'appeal anche negli elettorati dell'Europa, degli Stati Uniti, dell'Australia, del Giappone, e questo ovviamente ha delle conseguenze immediate anche per la politica italiana e per quello che deve essere la nostra proiezione in questa regione. Bisogna essere consapevoli di questa minaccia, bisogna essere anche abbastanza più proattivi nel contrastare, questo è un altro elemento emerso dalla conferenza di oggi, e quindi è importantissimo che questi dati che sono stati raccolti oggi, diffusi oggi, ricevano una maggiore attenzione, ed è anche per questo che siamo qui noi di Adnkronos, per raccontare un mondo che non sempre viene raccontato, soprattutto ovviamente nell'emergenza che stiamo vivendo in questi giorni, legata all'Iran, legata all'Ucraina, legata a Gaza, ma si muove un mondo al di là del Mediterraneo che ci riguarda, e credo che in questo momento anche le istituzioni italiane siano ben più consapevoli. Appunto, come ricordavamo prima, oggi si è svolto un altro convegno stamattina organizzato da Forza Italia con i vertici di quel partito per parlare di Europa e di Medio Oriente e India e Indo-Pacifico, e questa conferenza, appunto, che è parte di una serie organizzata dal Nato Defense College Foundation, ci racconta un mondo in evoluzione che non aspetta i tempi della politica europea, e quindi la politica europea sta iniziando a capire quello che deve fare in questo campo, in questo quadrante. Ecco, siamo qui con l'onorevole Bergamini che ci raggiunge. Ben arrivata, prego. Buonasera. Allora, lei nel suo discorso conclusivo ha fatto capire che l'Italia sta acquisendo una nuova consapevolezza quando si parla di Indo-Pacifico. Oggi c'è stata la conferenza anche organizzata da Forza Italia che è stata aperta da lei e che è stata chiusa poi dal ministro Tajani, proprio sull'importanza di questo quadrante. Si è parlato di IMEC, di questo nuovo corridoio economico, e molte volte è emerso nella conferenza di oggi che fondamentalmente la sicurezza economica e i legami economici con questa regione sono poi una garanzia anche di sicurezza politica, militare, di stabilità. Ecco, che cosa può fare oggi il nostro governo, ma in generale l'Europa, per essere più consapevole dell'importanza dei legami con l'Indo-Pacifico? E insomma, oggi hanno parlato esperti che venivano dall'India, dal Giappone, da Taiwan, dalla Corea. Domani mattina ci sarà un'altra parte di conferenza dove ci sarà anche l'ambasciata coreana a Roma che sarà rappresentata e parlerà. Insomma, è un mondo che oggi forse non appare così evidente durante le crisi che stiamo vivendo con l'Iran, con Gaza, con l'Ucraina, ma è un mondo che rappresenta, come lei ha ricordato, il 70% della crescita economica, il 35% della ricchezza, e quindi dobbiamo farci conti forse anche di più.
Sì, mai come in un momento come questo, che è un momento buio di crescente conflittualità, la regione del Medio Oriente allargato, stiamo vedendo quello che accade, mai come in un momento come questo dobbiamo occuparci del futuro e dobbiamo stare molto attenti a quello che succede attorno a noi, perché nei momenti più bui si acquisisce la lucidità e la capacità di capire come evitare gli errori che hanno portato ai momenti bui. Allora noi oggi dobbiamo sforzarci di cooperare molto di più. È vero che abbiamo il più alto numero di conflitti in corso dalla Seconda Guerra Mondiale ad oggi nel mondo, ma è altrettanto vero che stiamo sperimentando un modo di dialogare, di cooperare, di immaginare, di proiettare che fino a qualche anno fa non era così intensivo, e questo è un segnale molto positivo. Il governo italiano sta cogliendo questo momento nel modo giusto, secondo me, perché la politica estera di questo governo si muove su, diciamo, 3 traiettorie. La prima è quella europeista e atlantista, e quindi un saldo raccordo con i paesi dell'Occidente libero. La seconda è un investimento reale in termini certamente sempre molto equi con il piano Mattei sull'Africa, e la terza traiettoria è sicuramente l'Indo-Mediterraneo, o se vogliamo estenderlo la dimensione dell'Indo-Pacifico. Perché? Perché sappiamo molto bene che proprio come diceva lei in quella dimensione si sta sperimentando una crescita economica straordinaria, una straordinaria capacità di innovazione tecnologica e digitale, e che quindi i nostri interessi nazionali devono necessariamente proiettarsi là, non solo per ragioni di prevenzione rispetto alla sicurezza, ma proprio in ragione, e lo dice il nostro ministro Tajani, di trovare nuovi mercati, e per farlo dobbiamo anche costruire strutture che garantiscano maggiore scambio commerciale. Questo è il lavoro che stiamo facendo, consapevoli delle difficoltà. Dall'altra parte, come ho evidenziato, abbiamo bisogno di un'Europa che faccia un salto di qualità, perché senza questo salto di qualità noi saremo destinati a perdere inevitabilmente posizioni. Dobbiamo quindi andare avanti con la costruzione dell'architettura europea, rivedere le regole che non funzionano, perché alcune ce ne sono che non funzionano, e soprattutto chiarirci che quando si parla di sicurezza, è un dibattito che naturalmente tocca tutti i paesi aderenti all'Unione Europea, quando si parla di sicurezza non si parla di carri armati e basta, ma si parla di investimenti in modernizzazione, in contrasti per esempio ai cyberattacchi, in un uso intelligente dell'intelligenza artificiale che non danneggi i nostri paesi e la nostra sicurezza, in investimenti sottomarini, in tante diverse dinamiche che costruiscono la percezione di sicurezza dei nostri cittadini. E questa è una primaria responsabilità per qualunque governo, figuriamoci per quello italiano, che si colloca geostrategicamente al centro del Mediterraneo, al centro del Mediterraneo allargato.
Grazie a Deborah Bergamini, e adesso non so se è con noi adesso le chiediamo un secondo. Stiamo aspettando, lei deve fare un'altra intervista, Deborah Bergamini, e adesso aspettiamo l'intervento dell'ambasciatore Minutorizzo per concludere i nostri lavori di oggi. Vi do appuntamento fra un minuto e saremo qui con l'ambasciatore Alessandro Minutorizzo. Eccoci, siamo qui con l'ambasciatore Alessandro Minutorizzo, presidente della Nato Defense College Foundation. Un bilancio su questo primo giorno di conferenza?
Beh, un bilancio molto positivo, perché, come dire, il tema è di una straordinaria importanza, è un tema veramente da prima pagina, diciamo, no? Da prima notizia. E se ne sa poco in realtà, in Europa almeno, forse anche in Asia, comunque in Europa se ne sa poco, e noi abbiamo fatto un grande sforzo per organizzare questa conferenza, cercando possibilmente i migliori speakers e gli argomenti che possono coagulare un interesse. È un lavoro non facile, ma quando riesce è un lavoro anche molto efficace, perché io ho imparato molto io stesso sulla cooperazione, sulle minacce ibride, e continueremo a farlo. Noi in Europa naturalmente siamo tutti un po', come dire, patriottici in un certo senso, no? Non ci dimentichiamo di essere il 10% della popolazione mondiale. L'Indo-Pacifico fa, non so, i 2/3, 3/4, qualcosa del genere, quindi è un'area di cui dobbiamo conoscere di più, e in Italia si sta facendo di più in questo senso, quindi io sono molto ottimista sul fatto che bisogna continuare su questa strada, che è una strada che può essere percorsa.
Ecco, infatti parlavamo prima anche con Deborah Bergamini del fatto che oggi, ad esempio stamattina, c'è stata una conferenza organizzata da Forza Italia e dal ministro Tajani, in cui si è parlato anche di IMEC, del corridoio tra India, Medio Oriente e Europa. E questo però è una conferenza che fa parte di un ciclo di conferenze della vostra fondazione. Questo è già un capitolo avanzato, nel senso che sia sull'est Europa sia sull'est del mondo vi state molto concentrando, ed è un formato nuovo, nel senso che da pochi anni la NATO ha iniziato a mettere l'Indo-Pacifico come centro del suo orizzonte. E la cosa che ho trovato anche molto interessante è che c'è una risposta nuova anche quando si parla di Giappone, di Australia, di Corea del Sud. Questi erano paesi che fino a pochi anni fa erano riluttanti a ingaggiare con una realtà che nasce come un'alleanza strategica militare come la NATO. Oggi invece sono loro stessi che chiedono maggiore cooperazione, maggiore integrazione.
Beh sì, anche perché la NATO ha un po' cambiato pelle, diciamo la verità, poi il futuro non lo conosciamo, ma da alleanza nata nel 49 per, diciamo, difendere l'Europa da una possibile invasione sovietica, quello era lo scopo originario, è diventata, come si dice in inglese, un security provider, quindi si guarda a 360 gradi. Io, quando ero alla NATO, facevo consultazioni politiche col Giappone, sono stato in Giappone, loro ospite, e già allora loro manifestavano un interesse nei confronti della NATO che mi sorprendeva perfino un po', devo dire, no? Perché la consideravano un'organizzazione di successo, cioè fatta bene, insomma, un'organizzazione che funzionava. Quindi credo che, come dire, ci sia una strada. E poi, come dire, anche l'Italia sta ritrovando, secondo me, un po' una dimensione storica che è un po' perduto. Nel senso che anche prima della Seconda Guerra Mondiale noi avevamo, come dire, molti contatti con l'Afghanistan, con il Tibet, perfino con il Giappone. Quando io sono entrato nella carriera diplomatica nel 1967 era stata appena chiusa la carriera per il Medio e l'Estremo Oriente, ne avevamo 2 addirittura, quindi come dire non è una cosa che comincia oggi, è una cosa che viene ripresa dopo tanto tempo, forse perché la storia ce lo impone, probabilmente.
Insomma, l'Italia in queste occasioni dimostra la sua capacità di unire, di diventare piattaforma di confronto fra dei mondi diversi, e che però riconoscono nel nostro paese sia l'autorevolezza sia l'affidabilità di venire qui per condividere delle idee e anche delle posizioni. In alcuni casi abbiamo sentito oggi delle posizioni anche forti, quando si parlava di Taiwan, quando si parlava di Russia, di Cina. Quindi insomma devo dire che Roma torna abbastanza al centro di questi crocevia mondiali.
Ma questo è quello in cui io credo un po', devo dire. Tant'è vero che questa fondazione, che è nata 14 anni fa, è nata a Roma, e io ci tengo a fare le cose non sempre, ma quasi sempre a Roma, proprio perché trovo che, ragionando seriamente, il baricentro del mondo è un pochino sceso a sud negli ultimi 50 anni, non tanto, ma è un po' sceso a sud. E mentre Roma poteva essere marginale, non so, ancora negli anni 80 o forse 90 dello secolo scorso, oggi è molto più centrale, perché abbiamo l'Europa dietro di noi, dalla parte l'Asia, sotto l'Africa, quindi è un posto anche attraente, diciamo pure.
Grazie, allora su questo concludiamo la nostra diretta. Vi ringrazio da parte della Adnkronos, ringrazio chi ci ha seguito, ovviamente l'ambasciatore Minutorizzo per l'ospitalità, e ci vediamo alle prossime dirette di Adnkronos.